I comment there once in a while, and on Twitteros. Um, I've been, but when I work, most of my work is just my analysis on my blog, Mythological Weave of Ice and Fire. And since 4 years ago, I've been reading more and more of his other stories, and I've been incorporating quotes and examples of his other stories to prove certain points in my analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire. So that's how. And certainly, this story has several wordy passages and quotes to include
Oh yeah.
on any essay on what I refer to conceptually as the Plutonian others. So,
Yes, that's a good essay of Sweet Sun Rays. And if you have a chance, check out her blog, and I'll give you that information before we're through this evening. So, again, welcome everybody for being here. And so, what is Nightflyers all about? So let's dig into this story. We're going to have many of the very common repeating themes in George World, Martinworld, such as hubris, God worship, or God complexes, more terribly, turning on your own people or turning on your own worshippers, discarded knights, red, green, blue elementals, chess or football games, more games. In this story in Nightflyers, they're not given official names, but there's two games that are played in Nightflyers. I call them by what like the call word is when you score a point. One of them's ricochet and one of them's setback. So we have ricochet and setback in this story, and then we have more of the like hive mind versus collective consciousness. We have more terribly than that, we have mental invasion. And then we also have naming styles and name meanings. That there's a George quote out there where he says that he really can't figure out who a character is until he figures out their name. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. And then we also have the wise woman, or someone who tries to remind you who you are. And let's see. And then, so what about Nightflyers? Like how and when did this come about in George's mind? This, with so many themes in this story, there's a phrase I often use as a gulf of space or a gulf of water. It's all just furniture in Martinworld. So he's been figuring out all of these little details, and this is one of his better stories where he really is seamless with getting it all in there and making you scratch your head and really have to think about it the whole time. This story took a few years of writing. I think he began it in like 77 or 78. And there was the original version that was published in 1980, but then there was an updated version that was published in 1981. At the time that he was working on this story, either writing it or publishing it, and then rewriting it and republishing it, he was also working on Sand Kings, which we have done a live stream on if you want to check that out. Plus, that story is transcribed with notes on my own blog page. He was also working on The Way of Cross and Dragon, and he was also working on Windhaven with Lisa Tuttle, which that's an amazing story that I would love to talk about one day. It'll probably take a few videos, but whatever. And he was also developing and writing the story, The Ice Dragon. This is a very important one because the Vulcan essentially, it has little snippets of other things in Ice and Fire, but it really reads like another sort of ice dragon element that is in the story. So from one of George's Dream Songs anthologies, this is what he says about ice dragons. Ice dragons have become commonplace features of a lot of fantasy books and games in the 20-odd years since I wrote The Ice Dragon. But I believe mine was the first, and most of these other ice dragons appear to be no more than white dragons living in cold climates. Adara's friend, a dragon made of ice that breathes cold instead of flame, remains unique so far as I'm aware, my only truly original contribution to the fantasy bestiary. So that's also a lot like the others. So you're going to, if you have your bingo cards ready, Ice Dragon Others, you're going to hear me saying that a lot this time around. Ice Dragon Others. Think of the others and how George has said that they can make things with ice that's unique to them, and how things are very shimmery and crystally, and they wear a type of chameleon cloth. We can go on and on. We will, but in a minute. So this story has, if you're listening to this and reading along now or later, this story has 39 sections, and we have broken it down basically into 4 main parts. And we will go through those because we're going to be introduced to all these characters, and then we're going to start to see some plotting, and then we're going to see some, and that plotting happens with this fiery mother, and then we're going to see some other instances where this icy dragony Vulcan comes into play in the second half, and then we're going to get to the conclusions. The characters we meet in the first version of the story, which is, if you go online, you'll probably see this copy most often. This is the first version of the story from 1980. This story only named Royd Eris, Caroli de Brannon, Melantha Jurl, and the Dragon Mothership. The rest of the crew, they didn't have names. They were listed very generically by their career, by their specialty that they bring onto the ship. And those characters we meet are Royd Eris, Melantha Jurl, she's a cultural xenologist, Caroli de Brannon, who is he's a scholar from the Academy of Human Knowledge on Avalon, and he's the one that chartered the Nightflyer ship. Lami Thorne, she's a cyberneticist. She's very important to this story, especially how she plays her into the Quentin Martell in his final Dragon Tamer chapter. There's Tala Lassimer. He's the young telepath. He's very strong, class 1 powers. He is what triggers the fire dragon mother in this story. Some common ice and fire comparisons for Tala Lassimer are Sweet Robin and Bran, and how we see some seizing going on in there. There's a double entendre to the word seizing in that one. Agatha Marige Black, she's a psych. She is the companion to Tala Lassimer. She's a level 3 telepath. Rojan Christophorus, he's a xenobiologist. He's really surly and he's argumentative. Alice Northwind, she's another xenotech. Daniel and Lindren are both linguists, and they're lovers to they're partners to each other, but they have a strange sexual relationship with each other at the same time. So, then there's the mothership, and then there's the Vulcan. So,
Jack. Jack has left the building.
So this story does take place in the Thousand Worlds universe. It is a haunted spaceship in outer space. I know recently online there's been some discussion about can stories take place can horror stories take place in space, or does that just automatically qualify them as sci-fi? George does not see it that way. I won't go totally into it at the moment because I want to save more time to discuss the story. But when you go into Dream Songs, George explains this very well. Plus, this story is under his section that he calls hybrids and horrors. So it's, despite what our own personal rules or definitions of what is considered horror or sci-fi or fantasy, author intent plays a much larger role in that case. We're in their world at that stage. You're also going to find a lot of repeating themes, such as high body counts and Psi-Link mind control and whisper jewels and corpse handling. And this is really a prototype story to the Night's Watch as a naval institution in space. So if you were to take this story and chunk it into the timeline of Song of Ice and Fire, this is essentially John at the wall and his mutiny attempt in space. So we're kind of in Dance of Dragons and A Dream of Spring with John in this story. You're also going to hear me talk about, get your bingo cards ready. You're going to hear me mention Val a lot. Val is a very strong female character that George has written into so very many of his stories in the past. She's actually not new at all. She's one of the stronger heavy hitters, I guess you could say, of George's repeating archetypes. And an important thing about not about Val. Val is the Melantha Jurl. Melantha Jurl and Val, and I'll save the bulk of this for a different live stream, but Melantha Jurl and Val, they are the archetypal parallels to each other. Melantha is from Prometheus. And Prometheus is a human world in the 1,000 Worlds universe that's colonized by the military army of the Federal Empire. And it was located within the war zone where the Harangans had all of their wars. So again, that's like Val and the Free Folk being caught in the middle of these Ice Dragon wars. But the thing about Prometheus, the name Prometheus is taken from a character in Greek mythology. He is a champion of humans, is credited with the creation of humanity from clay, and he defies the gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity in order for civilization to advance and not rely on the gods. It's autonomy. We're going to see a lot of that in the Song of Ice and Fire by the end of the story. Like, the gods and this whole Iron Throne business is going to be flipped on its lid. And then a driving factor, what really starts the story off, is finding the Vulcan. And the Vulcan is akin to other Martinworld space oddities, such as the Plague Star and the Red Comet in Song of Ice and Fire. It's an ancient spacefaring group of creatures that live in the vacuum of the galaxy and are gradually migrating away from the core. They possess powerful psi abilities, but think and move so slowly and in such distant regions of space that they are rarely noticed by other sentient life forms. So that's kind of like, again, the Ice Dragon others. Where have they been for all this time? Why are they coming out from their land of always winter, or where they come from now? Like, what is driving them now? And if we think back to an interview George gave back in 2015, where he kind of explained, he did a pretty good job of explaining what the title of A Song of Ice and Fire means, and that it's a war story at heart, and that the two biggest threats are on the periphery. It's the ice dragon and it's the red dragon Targaryen side. Everything else in the middle is just caught in the middle. So so what's in a name? George has stated that Melantha means dark flower. So again, thinking back to the Free Folk, all the the women have all of the flower names. Also, the name Royd Eris, as in meteoroid or shooting star. Even if we're just going with some like basic terms here, with small tweaking between stories, is related possibly thematically on the literary level to House Dane or the Sword Dawn. And George did say that back in 2019 that Dawn is his favorite sword. So he's a big kid at heart. He likes to play with his toys over and over again. Additionally, Royd is partnered with Curly de Brannon. Possibly the name origin of de Brannon. This name means sorrow, which fits this character a lot in the end. And yeah, he's the Academy Scholar that was on a mission to discover the Vulcan. I feel like this is kind of a lot like Bran in the Bloodraven situation, where they're going to encounter the Ice Dragon others first, but we'll talk about that. This story can be found real quickly. Most people have this book at this point, Dream Songs. It's in Dream Songs. This one's 1, which means that it's on Audible. This is the original version. You might be able to find some copies of it out there. But it was also released within the last 2-3 years, new publishing, in these versions. This copy right here is the illustrated version. I have many of the pictures straight from this book on my blog page if you want to take a look at them. And okay, so that brings us to the Vulcan. That's essentially the bulk of what's happening here. So let's start with some of these sections. Act 1, it starts with the introduction to the Vulcan, and then they board the ship, and then the ghost appears. That's the thing about Royd, is he's often referred to as the ghost or even a specter, but some sort of ghost. We all know why that's important, especially since Royd is such a strong Jon, not only Jon, but such a strong Jon character. Then a few weeks pass by, we get some more character information, and then they start to grow restless. And then we get to the point where Royd says to Melantha that she is good to watch, and that is where most of the Val information comes in. So Act 1 is sections 1 through 6. I know you guys have some ideas on this. Sweet Sunray, do you want to give us a few of your ideas, and we'll start with the chat?
For Act 1, what I find interesting is how George builds up and layers the mysteries. So first there's the introduction section, and it talks about the Vulcan, and it gives the reader this idea that what the story they're going to read is going to be about the Vulcan. That's the mystery. Are we going to meet them, etc.? Mm-hmm. Are they dangerous? Whatever. And that would be the subject of the story. It is partially the subject of the story, but it's not. It actually recedes a lot to the background. And then in the boarding of the ship, you're actually introduced to something you don't yet know is going to be a mystery, and that's the ship itself. So it's being described as having 3 eggs, as 3 hulls, and then a maw and two cabins, and you like the passengers going on. But it's very mundanely described, so you're not really suspicious of the ship or anything. And it's only later when things start to happen and like what's going on that more and more what's the ship actually that this is becoming more and more important. Um, but you don't know that yet in Act One as reader when you read it for the first time that this is going to be a mystery. But you get the introduction to Royd for the first time, and immediately get to know that there's a mystery about him because he appears as a hologram, as a ghost, and he communicates through the intercom, but he never leaves his private
post.
space. He remains behind the wall, and everybody else is getting more wondering about what's going on with him and suspicious, etc. A lot of the introductions to the other characters is via their communications, like wondering what's going on with this captain, and so these are the mysteries laid out. The Valkyrin, the captain, and also with the first introduction, you get introduction, and at the end, and then you jump actually back in time, and you're wondering like, okay, so but who is actually narrating the introduction or the story overall? Because that's a mystery, and is that resolved? Well, it's not explicitly told. You kind of have to figure it out yourself as a reader. And we can discuss this later when we think.
And we will.
We will. So,
Okay.
yeah. I'm leaving my other observations about the characters for the later acts because that's kind of more interesting.
The thing that just occurred to me as she was talking is she says, "Oh, you're given the Vulcan, and then you get a diversion, and you get distracted by the rest of the plot, exactly like the others." Is what I'm thinking.
Right.
Like, you get the prologue, and
Right.
then a bunch of stuff happens, and you forget in the prologue this thing happened until later in the story it comes around again.
You're
So
absolutely right.
there's just another structural reason why the Vulcan is comparable to that.
Absolutely. That's a good point. That's an excellent point.
Very good point.
The problem with this story is that most of the stuff that I think is interesting is loaded in like the first two sections, and it's hard to discuss it because they're larger Martinworld things. Like, just, I don't know if this is the first story with Prometheus in it, but the Thousand Worlds is something that's a lot like Westeros, in that the locations are almost characters. Places like Bravos is the Free City, or King's Landing is a nest of vipers. That the places have a specific character and a purpose. They're not just like geographical locations. So like Prometheus is like, Frankenstein, the first modern sci-fi novel, was also subtitled A New Prometheus, about playing God. Yeah. So when you think about Prometheus, this is like the flesh pits of Gagasos and probably Valyria and House of the Worm and a bunch of other George works. This may be, Leach, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this is one of the first stories where you get a lot of exposition about the Thousand Worlds, and it gets developed in other stories. So this isn't specific to Nightflyers, but there's a ton of stuff in there. There is a parallel between like the Vulcan and Royd, that they are maybe not specifically like the analogy of people like Rhaegar and Lyanna, in that they're things onto which, they're blank pages onto which other characters can project their feelings. So all of the individual characters, as they start to talk amongst themselves about who's Royd and what's going on, and this is all very strange. George does the same thing in A Song of Ice and Fire, where you never get to hear, like, you get one line from Rhaegar from Jaime's recollection, but almost everything we know about Rhaegar is different people's opinions about Rhaegar. And George really likes that kind of indirect way of telling the story of something that is not there. Nobody truly knows what the Vulcan is and you get to see the Vulcan through these stories and legends and myths of different cultures that have interacted with it, but there's not consensus about what it is, and George really likes that pattern of writing. So there's a lot to say about those particular things, but they are kind of structural before the plot gets underway. Other than that, obviously the ship is essentially a character. It might as well be an animal or a person. It's talked about as if it was a living thing. And again, Royd is the ghost behind the wall. We'll talk about that character more as we proceed through this, but there's a story that somebody had asked George at an event, and I couldn't find the reference, about if he always knew Bloodraven was Bloodraven. And he said he had to build out the backstory, but he always had this idea that there was going to be a character like that in the North that Bran was going to have to see. He just didn't know where that person fit into history. And as we analyze these individual characters, you can make analogies between the Song of Ice and Fire parallels to them, but in a lot of cases they're either combined or separated. In this case, Royd is a lot more like Leech, help me here. The character who lives in the Volkswagen Bug that does the telekinesis.
Tom Toddberry.
Right. In that's his world. That's where he's always been, right? He's essentially a character that's in an egg, and that's not the story of Brynden Rivers. Brynden Rivers was a political actor in Westeros who eventually goes north of the Wall. And what this can tell us is that basically, like, the whole idea of Bloodraven in the cave is something that George has been planning for all along. All the political actions and machinations of Brynden Rivers in Westeros as the Hand of the King, that's almost a separate character that was built to flesh it out. But he was always meant to be that guy in the cave because that's the essence of who that archetype is. That's one of George's archetypes. It's not like something from mythology or from other works. It's a specific thing that he's constructed. It's that kind of character.
Yes.
And a lot of these, we'll get into the other characters, but a lot of the characters, their origins are different, or we previously talked about like Dany and the Glass Flower, but where we start the Glass Flower with Serene is not where we are with Dany as a character in A Song of Ice and Fire. So some characters used to have a beginning and now don't, or vice versa. So that's a useful thing to talk about as we go through individual characters, where they hold up and where they don't. We think some of the things that we see here we can take as a pretty good inclination that it's going to happen similarly in the other books. Not everything holds up, but the more prominent patterns definitely do over time. So that's our assertion.
Yes, that's something that I also wanted to mention with Royd, since he is such a prominent character here. Royd is another one of these. I don't want to say prototypes because George wasn't thinking of Ice and Fire before, but in the scheme of his writing, there are these prototypes that have been perfected and developed along the way until we got to what we have in Ice and Fire. This is another one of the John Bran Bloodraven. I say that a lot. The John Bran Bloodraven archetype, where it's one character from a story that
variations on a theme.
Right. Yeah. That he's divided into three. These three, and I mean,
the way I think about it, it's like diagramming a sentence. There's nouns and there are verbs. There are certain characteristics they have, like they're always armored in black. You know, there are certain things they do, which is break open their eggs. You know, they have it's a checklist, again, with the bingo card.
And then, right. And then they're often in these like secluded little caves, or in Royd's case, he even calls it his library. So he's in his library, his own little cave. So even though the Nightflyer ship itself is controlled by the dragon mother, and I'm using that term very specifically, and I'll show you guys in just a minute. Even though it's controlled by this red dragon, within it, we still have this green element of the library, the ghost, the green seer, because he sees all, even though he can't interact with anybody or influence anybody. He's watching them because he's taking it all this information in, and between the green seers and John and the story that we have now, and then coming up in Ice and Fire, this kind of steers us in a little bit of direction. So real quickly, just to kind of clear this up towards the beginning of our chat here, why do I keep calling this the Dragon Mothership? This is, let me pull it up here. This is the, that's a better one. Here we go. This is the ship from the movie. This story was made into a movie. I believe it was in 1986. And then again in 2018, the Sci-Fi Channel tried to make it into a television show. The show I was extremely excited about, because this is like my second favorite George story. The show didn't do so well. They made a lot of nods to the book. Even the production company was called Fever River Packet, or actually I think they changed it to Jacket, Fever River Jacket Company. So I was like, okay, these guys kind of know what they're doing. But there were too many changes, and in the story on the television show was never renewed. Oddly enough, the 1986 movie, as weird as it is, and as many edits as they had to make to run, within a 2-hour time, if you get a chance to go to my blog page, I have a link to the movie. Watch the movie. It's actually a lot closer to the book, and I hardly ever say that.
It fails in a more sincere way.
Yes. Yes. So that's the ship. It kind of looks like Darth Vader's helmet or something, I don't know, something like that. However, in the books, this is what it looks like. And the way it's described, you have 3 eggs. The one on the left breaks first. That is the same thing that happens with Dany's eggs. And those are also 2 moons. So if we think of the Karth tale of where dragons come from 2 moons, or from the second moon. And
and we should point out the two spheres are the living areas, and the 3 spheres are supposed to be for cargo, but they've been repurposed for human use because there's so many members on the crew. He mentions that he's turned on the heat and the gravity in the cargo holds because there's not enough space to hold everybody. And
you can even kind of follow that analogy a little bit more. It's this dragon ship is holding the lives, holding the souls. So Dany's eggs needed the souls to wake, basically. So
people had to be put into the eggs.
Right. Yeah. A few more things about the ship. So described from the book, it says most ships docked flush against the station, but the craft that Corelli de Brannon had charted for his mission was too large and too singular in design. It loomed ahead, 3 small eggs side by side, 2 larger spheres beneath and at right angles, the cylinder of the drive room between the lengths of tube connecting it all. The ship was white and austere. So, and then later we get the description that it has nuclear engines. So that is something, if we remember from many George interviews where he talks about Dany's dragons, he calls them the nuclear deterrent. So, in his words, it's very consistent across all of his writing that when he has these dragons, especially these red and black Targaryen type dragons, they're nuclear. Which is not good. And then as they're first boarding, the first person that notices that they're being watched is Talalassimer, who is the last to enter. The last to enter is the first one that says we're being watched. And that's what starts to trigger the Dragon Mother Mom. So then we get to the ghost appearing. So we're introduced to this dragon, and then the ghost appeared. So the ghost appeared at the banquet. They found the lounge easily enough after they had rigged their sleep webs. Another common thing is a sleep web, and arranged their personal belongings around their sleeping quarters. And then they have to use a gravity grid. Royd makes them comfortable because he uses a gravity grid. The gravity is very painful to Royd because he can't walk. So here we go with a little bit more of the Bran stuff. He's not very good at walking. His muscles have atrophied. He's been sitting in this chair, basically like Bloodraven's throne in his cave for so long that his muscles have atrophied. So to have gravity on makes it painful for him. So it's one of the reasons why he watches people from this, essentially these red eyes, kind of like Ghost. And
he has a number of them.
Yes,
not quite 1,000, but
not quite 1,000. But he has, he does. He has a number of them. And then so that's why he appears as this hologram or this ghost. And so he says, my quarters are on the other side of that wall. So he's also, like Sweet Son Ray was just saying a few minutes ago, he's behind a wall. And that is a wall that a little bit later in the story, the conspirators need to get behind because they are going for him. So they want to see what he is. So yeah, there's a little bit more John stuff in there. And then we start to get some backstory that's a little bit like some of Old Nan's tales. But the ghost at the head of the table cast a long shadow, and the meal was strained and hurried. It's like creepy.
I admire his restraint in not giving into food porn. Because this would be the perfect opportunity for George to go on for 10 pages about what they were eating. But he doesn't.
If there's
but George does that in A Song of Ice and Fire only with Tyrion and a few select characters. Each point of view has their own focus. Like Cat focuses on hair and beards, etc. Sansa on clothing, Jaime on ice, etc. So yeah, it differs. But if it's a Tyrion chapter, you're gonna get a whole banquet.
Yeah, that is quite true. And actually, in one of his first, when he's in Winterfell, there's a reference to Tough Voyaging when he's talking about his breakfast. What he's eating is loaves and fishes, but that's a different live stream. So with this gravity grid, the gravity also helps keep the mother in check. But if you think about Bran, again, back with Bran, he's falling from the tower when he's pushed. We think of that as opening his third eye, and right before he hits the ground, or maybe he does hit the ground. I know Shatterjack has some ideas on this as well, but there's something about the gravity and controlling gravity to save your life and opening your third eye. That is,
well, weightlessness in general is a psychically activating event, like in Fast Friends. Also, when the characters undergo a transformation, they're in a rotating space station, and what you do is you essentially go. It's sort of the other thing. The other part of that is he uses this idea of like cauldrons as transforming, which is kind of like the old Irish, the Iron Cauldron, that story. But in Fast Friends, there's a rotating space station, and at the center of the space station is the 0G area, and you go into this special chamber. You descend into a chamber at the 0G center of this space station, and the characters are transformed in a significant way in that place. So generally speaking, that's how magical or psychic power is activated, is in weightlessness. There's something about escaping. Flying is about escaping gravity, and so that's generally George's metaphor. Again, Windhaven. There's
Yes.
all that. There's a bunch of stuff. Any idea of flying equals magic, or weightlessness equals psychic power, or that's just a recurring thing that he does, which
Absolutely.
we don't need to get into theory crafting about.
You will never walk again.
Hometown.
You will never walk again, but you will fly.
Right.
Okay, so gets us into section 4 at this point. So here we've started to meet some of the characters, and we're getting to know their personalities a little bit, and it's section 4 starts with from the hour the Nightflyers slipped into Star Drive, Royd Eris watched his passengers. Star Drive is George's Thousand Worlds version of any sort of sci-fi projection of ships across space. So that's what Star Drive is. But I like the fact that he calls it Star Drive because that atmosphere is repeated over and over again. And then, so we're starting to notice that there's like a little bit of a divide that's going on with these passengers. It says within a few days, most of the academicians had grown accustomed to the disembodied voice from the communicators and the holographic specter in the lounge, but only Melantha Jurl and Caroli de Brandon ever seemed really comfortable in his presence. And this is where in this chapter is where we start to really get to know Caroli a little bit more personally, rather than just being the one from the Academy of Human Knowledge that wants to go study the Vulcan. We start to get a little bit more of his personality. And in my opinion, this is where Caroli de Brandon also starts to exhibit some features that George repurposed for Tormund, who I believe is going to be very important to John, especially in the Winds of Winter with John's reawakening. Some of Tormund's titles is Speaker to God and Father of Hosts. And then Tormund tells John that, well met, Jon Snow. I'm fond of wargs, as it happens, though not of Starks. So he likes the ghosts. Caroli de Brandon is comfortable with Royd, who is the ghost, and Tormund's like, I'm fond of wargs, which is ghost. So do you guys have anything to add with that really quickly? I'm sorry.
Yeah, for me, like when I think of Caroli, I foremostly think of Bran, but it's for a very specific reason. Of course, there's Bran in his name, but it's also when he has that conversation with Royd Eris about the Vulcan, about the stories about the Vulcan. He talks a lot like Bran talks in A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings about the children of the forest. And the way he describes these myths about the he's interested. He's a xenomythologist, but it's not just mythology. He's mostly interested in what we call folklore all the around the space. And what's Bran fan of? He's fan of old man stories with folklore. And what he tries to do is that he uses these folklore tales around the whole galaxy to prove that these Vulcan exists. And now that was an argument to go search for them. And it's more like it's like, in a way, there's like with the library, etc., you can say like with Samuel, but here is like, and that is one of my favorite quotes of the Act 1 is when he talks about them. It's a race of sapients moving out from some mysterious origin in the core of the galaxy, sailing towards the galactic edge, and it was alleged eventually bound for intergalactic space itself. Meanwhile, always keeping to the interstellar depths, no planetfall, seldom coming within a light year of a star. And when you hear that, I'm thinking about like this sounds so much like the stories of fairies, fairies that move between worlds, and you can kind of get lost into their world, but they're not really coming. And when they come, they're more like fiends or sprites, and they give you a bad luck day, and right.
Yeah.
And the Brahmin's gray eyes sparkled, and as he spoke, his hands swept enthusiastically to either side, as if they could encompass the galaxy. And doing it all without a star drive, right? That is the real wonder. Doing it in ships moving only a fraction of the speed of light. That was a detail that obsessed me. How different they must be, my Vulcan. Wise and patient, long-lived and long-viewed. So that's kind of like this whole idealism about fairies being wise and they never die, and then like in Tolkien they go to the Westlands, they leave the Middle Earth and they go to the West, and with none of the terrible haste and passion that consumes the lesser races. Think how old they must be, these Vulcan ships. And then he continues, according to the North Talush, one or two appeared first on the innermost edges of their trading sphere, but others followed, hundreds of them, each solitary, moving by itself, bound outward, always outward. The direction was always the same. For 15,000 standard years, they moved among the North Talush stars, and then they began to pass out from among them. The myth said that the last Vulcan ship was gone 3,000 years ago. And then he exclaims like, Roy, the stories. So that's kind of so Bran for me, like the Bran in the first two books. And who eventually he becomes more of a storyteller himself. But initially, and another thing that I like about, that I find interesting about this, when he describes these stories about the Vulcan, is that he mentions the Findi, call them Iwivi, which translates to something like Void Horde or Dark Horde. But Dark Lords, the Horde, the Hunt, etc. You can kind of find it, hear this in this story. And the Finn in the Irish mythology of the Tuatha De Danann, the Finn is a typically clan who is related to this, and they have wars, etc. So this is, and the Findi, they lose a horde to this Dark Horde. So that's kind of where I see, at least, I'm not saying they are the children of the forest, because they're not, but at least the Bran in this, in Nightflyers, he thinks of them as these idealistic fairies and children of the forest that he wants to get to know more and prove that they exist. That's kind of, at least this section for me is that.
So one thing on that before I want Jeff to go on is Tormund, being the tall talker, is telling the myth and the local legend to Jon, just as Old Nan is to Bran. So it's like both of them story within a story is so integral to their character development, that because it's feeding them information now, because they're at some point they're going to have to go and use this, recognize what's happening and use this information. So, Jeff, what do you have to say about this? Because I know this is, one of
first
these.
of all, before we leave Tormund for a moment, Tormund is also a liar, a capital L liar. Is that he's a braggart and a teller of tall tales, and that sort of thing. Not a liar in that he's trying to trick people, in that he's a storyteller. That's, we'll hear that word again George uses the word liars in a very specific sense.
He does.
But do you know who else has a voracious intellectual appetite, is associated with libraries, and traveled to the end of the world with Jon Snow? Tyrion Lannister.
Yes.
Book one, Tyrion won't stay out of the library and can't stop talking about all the legends and myths, and literally goes with Jon Snow to the end of the world, just like Crowley de Brannon is on this quest to go far, far away from the civilized world,
Right here.
to see his Volcran. Tyrion
Yes.
wants to go to the north. I've always wanted to see the Wall, and literally, you know, at the same time that Jon Snow is going there, especially book one Tyrion. He's diverged a lot, but during a time period where George was thinking like this is going to be a 3-book series, he was really hitting the idea of Tyrion being that kind of guy who was, you'd always find him asleep in the library. He was intellectually voracious. People forget that at one point he thought about being a Septon, which is, it's not, on page, it does work to be kind of a joke. Like, can you imagine Tyrion as a Septon? Haha, that's funny. But that's also characteristic of a guy who's like going through the library. Like, well, maybe the Maesters have all the answers. Maybe the Septons have all the answers. He's like going through, reading all the encyclopedias, trying to learn all the stories. And at some point, he was kind of fascinated with like the dogma or the catechism of the faith of the seven. Like maybe there's some truth in there. He's a guy who's just intellectually curious, voracious. He won't shut up about his books. And even in the later books, when he's in Essos, he like, they're like taking a food break while he's being carried around Andalos, and they come across the Valyrian road, and he's like, oh yeah, I read about these in a book once. They're amazing. Like he talked, everything that you hear about the seven wonders made by man, it was written by a maester, but Tyrion is always the one that brings it up. Oh yeah, I heard about that. That was in the, you know, this was the Wall was one of the wonders in wonders made by man. He's always the guy that catalogs the extreme stuff, and that kind of dorky enthusiasm is what you get from Crowley. And here he's like the guy that won't shut up about whatever his favorite topic is. Yes. That's kind of who he is. And Tyrion later gets really dark, and his story becomes more about his family and the toxicity and the politics and everything else. But book one, Tyrion, is a lot like that. And he's on a journey to a very distant part of the world. So, again, libraries, icy wall.
Yes.
Jon Snow.
Yes.
You know.
So
that's why him and Bran get along. Like he really sees, like, again, Tyrion is trapped in kind of a damaged body. Bran will eventually be trapped in a damaged body. They both like books. It's not just abandoned. That will come back before we finish with Tyrion's story. But, you know, it's been like 15 years, you know, 20 something.
And in that way, Samwell is also trapped in a clumsy body.
Right. And there are variations on a theme. It's kind of like George had a version of the story where Tyrion like stayed at the Wall, and that could have been Sam. Like you could imagine what that would be like. Somebody who wasn't a very good warrior, who just didn't fit in with the culture up there, and he was Jon's sidekick. Like that, in an alternate reality, that could have been a Tyrion. But George said, no, it's a good idea, but I need Tyrion to be down south. Yes, so I need another character to fill that hole who's kind of awkward. And that like became Sam.
Right.
So this is what this kind of analysis, this is what the payoff is. And the same way with Tormund, it's like Jon needs to have another character to bounce off of. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of got split into like the sassy part of it is Tormund, like the swagger and that kind of stuff. And Sam is kind of he's the Wikipedia on demand part of it. Like he knows all the lore. So, assuming he ever meets Jon again, but at least in the early parts of the book, that's what he's there for.
Right. And because if you read George's original pitch letter, like 90% of all of the important characters that we have on page now weren't even mentioned then. So it's like as this world, Song of Ice and Fire world, has expanded, so has his ability to have these like 1,000 characters. Because I think even
there's 1,000 characters.
I'm just here giggling, imagining Tyrion as the steward to Maester Aemon. Like he would love that.
Oh yes,
That would have been Tyrion's happiest ever after, because he can get away from his family,
And I
and
think, yeah,
Maester
Aemon would love
Aemon
it
would
too.
love him.
Yes,
They would so get along.
they would. They would, yeah. And and Tyrion would probably like be scribing, you know, everything down, writing everything down as much as
Right.
possible.
He's not much good to anybody else at the Night's
And
Watch, but to
in a
Aemon.
way, Aemon does try to entice Tyrion, you know, with his, oh, but you're like a giant.
Well, right. Well, and not only that, but he would have been in charge of the Ravens.
Oh.
So imagine Tyrion at as the Raven Master at the Wall, with Bloodraven north of the Wall with his ravens. Like, how could it not have been that at some point? Like, literally, there was like a week where George was like, "Yeah, that's perfect, that's great." Now wait a minute, that's not going to work, and he had to change it. But you see the little tool marks that are left over from it, like that conversation where he says, "Yeah, but nah." Like, I'm sure that's a joke. That's George's internal monologue about. He just changed his mind. Like, no, I can't do that.
Right, and I think in Nightflyers is probably about as close as we're ever going to get to having those fun visions ever.
Right.
Real quickly, I put the map back up. This is a map that was created by another fan called Caffeine 2, I believe. It's either Caffeine or Caffeine 2. This is the Thousand World, and I know it's hard to read right here. It's hard for me to find a really good copy that is also legible. But she did, I think it's a she, pardons if it's not a she. Caffeine did a really great job incorporating all of the different specific little areas of the Thousand Worlds and into this map, and it's taking great care to note specifically the relation of all of these different planets and where they are to each other, or what system that they're in. This thing right here, this sort of yellow band, that's essentially a prototype to the wall that divides like the deep space between like the man realm, and you can go back and forth through this. So that is something that George has tweaked a little bit for Ice and Fire. But you'll see that the Vulcan is here. The Vulcan is this spinny thing here. So in this story, we're down in space over here. On the other side is the Wheel of Fire. So on the other side, we still have a fire dragon versus an ice dragon. And in this Nightflyers story, towards the end, we do get mentioned that this Vulcan wants to break through this veil. It's called the Tempter's Veil. It wants to break through this wall, this Tempter's Veil. So, and then those two will be at war with each other, which again goes back to the title, what George said, the title of A Song of Ice and Fire means.
And that Tempter's Veil is another reference to the fairy folk, you know, the fairy that go beyond the veil of time and space.
Right.
Okay, so let's get back to going on to this now. So, so the plotting begins in Act 2, and where that is
we're at 1 hour and we're at Act 2.
Well, I know. Act 2 is in 2 spots. So we have plotting that's going on. Act 2 also includes like Melantha playing their version of chess, and then we have Alice, Northwind, and Lindren and Christophorus. They're plotting again, and then Lamy jacks into the cold. This is a lot like this section here. This is section 12. This is a lot like actually Melisandre, when she stares into the fires and she gets these visions and she gets this warm heat sensation, you know, depending on the scene. That is her jacking into this dragon cyber system. And yeah, here we go. So it says the system was up and running. Cyberneticist Lami Thorne sat at the master console, a featureless black plastic plate upon which the phantom images of 100 keyboard configurations came and went in holographic display, vanishing and shifting even as she used them. Around her rose crystalline data grids, ranks of view screens and readout panels upon which the columns of figures marched in geometric shapes did stately whirling dances, dark columns of seamless metal that contained the mind and soul of her system. She sat in the semi-darkness happily, whistling as she ran the computer through several simple routines, her fingers moving across the flickering keys with blind speed and quickening tempo. Ah, she said, smiling, later only, good. Then it was time for the final run-through. Lami Thorne slid back the metallic fabric of her left sleeve, pushed her wrist beneath the console, and found the prongs. Jacked herself in. Interface. Ecstasy. So
the left arm, the one closest to the heart.
Yes, the heart line. Nice. She jacked herself in. That's what that's what Melisandre's have happening. She's getting these visions. Her interpretation of the visions are true, but it's her interpretations that are off.
Right. Well, and a thing that I belabor quite a bit is that there's a lot of like opening Pandora's box and a lot of things George does, like literally like the dragon's eggs hatching or like Pandora's box opening and everything that's in the box comes out into the world. And that like what she's doing here, that this is essentially the event that the psychic, what they want to use is they want to use the psychic to see through the wall and his head explodes. And then she wants to use this computer connection to see what's going on in the rest of the ship. And when you pierce the veil, things come out. And that's the pattern that you see. That was in the world book. It says that the ravens were first let into the world when the crone drew back the veil to see what was beyond.
Yep.
So that's a pattern. It's not any bigger than that, but generally speaking, that's always the turning point in the story. Is somebody opens something that shouldn't have been open. And at least you were recently talking about the Dragon Tamer chapter. It's like they went through those doors and they shouldn't have, and the dragons got out. That this is another instance of that pattern. It's a Pandora's box pattern.
Yeah, and Lami, aside from the great analogy with Quentin that Leach made in the recent podcast of Game of Thrones, it's also like when she sees those shapes and whirling dancers, and she mentions how she feels wise beyond her years and powerful when she jacked into the ship system. This reminds me enormously of Miriam Azdur, who also conjured dancing shapes in Dany's tent and feels powerful and unafraid even when she's found out or when Dany becomes suspicious of her and starts to threaten her.
Right.
Like even when she's tied up to be burned, she's still arrogant and like, I know how to do this, etc., etc. And indeed, even in that, they kind of have a parallel because she dies by being taken into one of the 3 eggs that is cracked. Right. The door goes open and she's sucked out into into space.
And in general, these characters that always end badly, they think they're experts, and it's always they get in over their head. Like Quentin thought, oh, if I just do the right things, I can take care of the dragons. And Lami is like, I'm a totally a computer expert. I got this.
Yes.
And then they pierce whatever. They go into the thing, and they like, oh, that's why they always say, oh, like they just. Yes. They suddenly realize that this is not what I thought it was, and then they die.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's Mary Mazdor. She's like, oh, I'm the smartest, I'm the mighty magic person. I'm totally on top of this. And she's just way outclassed by Dany. And she was not expecting that.
No.
So a little more in this act. So a few other points I want to get to is George's introduction of drugs in this story. There's Cyanine 4 and there's Esperon. And Cyanine 4, again, this is part of the story where we get back to Tala Lassimer being akin to Sweet Robin, and probably some others, but primarily Sweet Robin, because he's like a B- level character possibly at this point. Cyanine 4 dampens your telepathic abilities. It just like knocks you out. Mm-hmm. And there's a phrase in Ice and Fire where the dose makes the poison. Same situation in this story. A little bit makes you feel like relaxed, kind of calms the voices in your head. Too much, you mess with your blood system and you can die and your head explodes.
Right.
However, that happened because of there's an influence from the Dragon Mother ship,
and it's on Esperon, right?
I'm sorry. Yes, that one's from Esperon. So then we get to Esperon. Esperon is just what it means. It's ESP on. It means that it takes your psionic abilities and it ramps them way up. Again, the dose makes the poison. So a little bit helps. Like there's a part in here where Melantha Jurl mentions that she has like a skosh of the talent, like a tiny bit of the ability. Thank you, Val. Anyway, where she has a skosh of the talent, and she talks about, well, if I take Esperon, then that'll like amp me up, and maybe I can like tap into what's going on. But what happens is there's a struggle over the control of Tala Lassimer, kind of like what we're seeing with the Sweet Robin. He's given too much of this Esperon, this ESP on, and his head explodes and he dies. So So the idea that pretty much everybody knows, it's more than hinted at in the books, is that Sweet Robin is being manipulated and he's being controlled with the sweet sleep and different things. But it's now at this point, what's going to happen to him next? Is somebody going to step in? Is somebody kind of like Val? I'm sorry, kind of like Melantha going to step in and try to take control? That would be Sansa in this case, most likely. And if that doesn't happen, what's going to happen to Sweet Robin? And again, as I mentioned earlier, this Sweet Robin and his seizures, that has a double meaning to it. That's mental control, seizing your mind, and that's what happens in Nightflyers as well.
The idea of essentially these are magic potions, is that these potions affecting people's ability. Darren the Drunkard from the Duncan Egg Tales drinks to keep his dragon dreams at bay because they haunt him. Tyrion does the same thing, and we can speculate about why that is, but Tyrion talks about drinking because he hates what he dreams of. He doesn't want to dream.
Yes.
And when Bran is initially given whichever the substance was, he wanted to have a dreamless sleep so that he could heal. The Maesters give him a
yes,
and there's literally something called dream wine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that same idea occurs at different levels. It's not just the Jon Bloodraven characters. It's other characters. We can talk. Dragon dreams are not the same thing as green seeing abilities, which are not the same thing as telepathy. But George plays with that idea of different substances to either enhance or reduce that ability.
And then this is also the section where we get the tale of the mother. And I will say that the tale of the mother is pretty much exactly like Daenerys's story, even her origin story, and her father. So there's a reason why in Ice and Fire, Dany keeps being told about her father. She's slowly being compared to her father, and even Viserys. Viserys was supposed to be like a little mini Aerys, and Aerys like really took him under his wing, and that's when, you know, the mom had to like pull little Viserys away from his father. And we see how Viserys turned out. And when we first meet Dany, she has conflicting emotions towards her brother. On one hand, it's her brother, but on the other hand, he's pretty cruel. And however, as her story arc progresses, we see that she refers to Viserys a lot, much more often. And even by the end of A Dance with Dragons, she's having like conversations and a little bit of sympathy for the situation for Viserys, for her brother. Again, this is something George has spent a lot of time working out. The mother, we never get her name. That's the one thing that I wish we did get. Is her name, especially since George put so much meaning in names. Instead of we're just having to call her the dragon other mother.
Yeah, she's called Mother.
Yep, Mother.
Well, and we should call out
Mother.
for the younger people in the audience that, you know, it's hard to read the story and not think of Psycho.
Yeah.
The idea of the son and the mother incestuously like locked up together.
Yeah.
If he was writing in the 70s, you know, that stuff was a lot closer than it is in modern pop culture. And a thing I think George does a lot is he always writes in response to things. Like he sees a movie and he's like, nah, I hate that. That's not how it would work. And then he writes like not a derivative work, but a response to it. It's like he saw Psycho and got some ideas about, because Psycho is that the mother is kind of this lurking menace that she's always a little bit off screen. And everybody's wrong about the nature of who the mother in Psycho is. And it gave him some ideas, and he said, oh yeah, it's totally like a haunted house story with this ghostly mother that's killing people, but in space and different.
Do you guys have your bingo cards ready? Ananda Kane. Ananda Kane. He does the same. He does the same thing with Ananda Kane. That is in the story Armageddon Rag, and in response to Hobbit, the whole Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, so the whole Tolkien thing. There's a line in the Armageddon Rag where he says, "This ain't like in Tolkien, is it?" Because you have all of these like typical things happening, or thinking that you know what's happening because they seem typical, but like the Nightflyer ship, you're introduced to it one way, but there's something lurking in the background, and it's a dragon other mother. It's Ananda Kane
in the attic.
Like and when Jeff said earlier about like how characters think they're kind of right, and there's always something wrong, but there's always a layer where they are right. And Lomi, in some points, is right, because at some point, which is the one of the quotes that I really like about this section, is most legal systems give a artificial intelligence no rights. The ship can't own itself even on Avalon. The Nightflyer is probably afraid of being seized and disconnected. She whistled. Death, Alice. The end of self-awareness and conscious thought. And Lomi Thorne smiled. A computer is different, Alice. She said, mind, thought, life. The big systems have all of that. Her right hand curled around her left wrist, and her thumb began idly rubbing the knobs of her implant. Sensation, too, I know. No one wants the end of sensation. They are not so different from you and I, really. So she hits. It's not an IA. Sorry, an artificial
AI.
intelligence AI, but it's but the concept.
But what she's saying is true.
What she's saying is true,
Right.
But
Well,
yeah,
and-
she mixed it all up with Royd and saying.
Well, and
it's
she's additionally right about Royd, that one of the things that motivates Royd is the idea of actually getting out of his shell and having sex. Like the
Yeah.
physicality of his world is that he's essentially
Sensation.
Bubble Boy. And so just like the AI doesn't want the end of sensation, Royd wants to experience the world. That's one of the reasons he's taken the risk of doing these things.
Yeah.
Is because he knows he lives in a finite body, and his body will eventually die. And what she's saying about the AI actually applies to Royd as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, my point is, so there's a lot of horror where horror is inherently a very conservative genre, because a lot of people do immoral things and then they suffer the consequences of their actions. So it's very much about like sin and the penance you pay for sin. Like a character does a wrong thing, like the Twilight Zone was full of that. It was always the greedy or the malicious characters that suffered the worst fates, and it's always they got what they had coming to them. But that's not how George writes. These characters aren't dumb, and they're not doing immoral things. The thing that connects them all, they're generally experts in their field. They're just very wrong about where the ceiling is. Like she thinks everything she knows about computers and AI, she is legitimately an expert in those fields, but she's never seen a ghost in a computer. She didn't even know that was possible. And that's the thing that leads the characters to their undoing, is there's something that it's not that they just disregarded the danger of it. They just didn't even know it existed.
So I want to read something real quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Agatha's end is kind of like the punishment of what she did to Tail, right? She gave him the Esperon, and eventually her head explodes too when she meets the Valkyrie.
Well, maybe that's like a more explicit case of that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
So I'm going to just read parts of something that George talks about, specifically about what horror is to him. And I did post this recently. And if you've read Dream Songs, it's in Dream Songs. But I happen to really love this quote. A good horror story will frighten us. Yes, it will keep us awake at night. It will make our flesh crawl. It will creep into our dreams and give new meaning to the darkness. Fear, terror, horror, call it what you will. It drinks from all those cups. Cup of ice, cup of fire. But please, don't confuse the feelings with simple vertigo. The great stories, the ones that linger in our memories and change our lives, are never really about the things they're about. Bad horror stories concern themselves with 6 ways to kill a vampire and graphic accounts of how the rats ate Billy's genitalia. Good horror stories are about larger things. Hope and despair, about love and hatred, lust and jealousy, about friendship and adolescence and sexuality and rage and loneliness and alienation and psychosis, courage and cowardice, the human body and mind and spirit under stress and in agony, the human heart in unending conflict with itself. Good horror stories make us look at our reflections in dark, distorting mirrors where we glimpse things that disturb us, things that we did not really want to look at. So sorry, it's went off screen. But yeah, that is, again, this is, despite what your idea might be about horror, we're in George's world right here. And this is what he's writing for us and showing us over and over again that the horror is not really what it first seems. And I love the fact that he put in there, it drinks from all those cups. Yeah, that's an existential choice that you have. What are you going to take in? What are you going to consume? The cup of ice, the cup of fire. the ice dragon, icy side that's related to Euron as well, or like the cup of fire that Dany takes?
There is I didn't come prepared with the citation, but that's actually been brought up a couple times, like Ned when he's in the black cells. There's an analogy to the Bible story about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he says, Lord, if this is your will, I will do it, but let this cup pass from me. And Ned says something very similarly in the black cells about, and I think when Varys says, again, it's at the point of darkest despair. Like Jesus in the garden is supposed to say this prayer, like he wants to know, what do I do to go forward? What is the path I take? And Ned is at this point of darkest despair, and Varys comes from him and makes him that offer. And Ned says something about, do I drink from this cup?
Yes.
Or should this cup pass from me? So George is, deeply steeped in Catholic catechism stuff, and he understands all that. So the drinking from a cup that seals your fate is all over the place.
So to finish up this one section, the section that gives a little bit more, a lot more backstory on the mother, which translates to Dany and her Misa Maulness about her Targaryen side. It's kind of a long section, so I'm just going to read a few bits. The Nightflyer was her ship, originally custom built to her design in New Home space yards. So it's so right off the bat, we're introduced to a specially designed thing that goes with this fire dragon person. So it's like Targaryens with their dragons, which are bred for war. However, this mom starts off a little differently. My mother was a free trader, a notably successful one. She was born on a trash world called Vess, which is a very long way from here, although perhaps some of you have heard of it. Vess is in Thousand Worlds. Vess, people from Vess, the whole thing, planet of Vess. One of the things that they are most known for is that they are they're elitist. They're essentially sort of racist, or think of themselves as above others. And one thing that Eris says is, and that Viserys repeats in a sort of a way, is that, Targaryens don't mate with the beasts of the field, which is other people. That has very racist undertones to it, especially if you know the term from Christian biblical history.
Well, and his downfall comes from the fact that he then arranges exactly that. He sells his sister to what he considers to be savages. And
right. That's because that's about when he starts to bring it up again.
Which is the thing. I think Dany will have that moment, to make a prediction. Like Dany will have a moment where she contemplates, in her mind, Viserys, she doesn't reject Viserys's path because he was mean. She rejected Viserys's path because he was a loser. He wasn't the dragon. He was less than the shadow of a snake.
Right.
And the lesson she got is she's going to say, oh, well, that was Viserys's. If Viserys had just married me to somebody of a higher quality, everything would have been fine. Like it was this, he was fixated on this dream and he wanted his army, and he was an idiot. If he'd have just focused on Targaryen family values, he would have had his kingdom or something. She's going to have a moment where she thinks about that moment and contemplating who she should pair with.
So, and then it goes on, it says, my mother did not worry about how often she and her crews returned home. Her ships were her home. She forgot about Vess as soon as she left it, and seldom visited the same world twice if she could avoid it. So that's a bit like the Targaryens escaping, or at least in part, Targaryens escaping Valyria. And then her ships were her home. There are so many stories, including Sand Kings, which we just did, that really point more and more to Dany's house with the red door is not exactly what she thinks it is. This memory, there's something wrong with this memory. And it may not necessarily be that she wasn't in Bravos, that it was something else, but she may be getting some sort of premonition of her own future.
Well, it's not a memory, it's a vision.
Right. Her ships are her home. Dany's ships are Drogon specifically. So it's something about Dany. That is her house with the red door. The red door is...
And Red is dead.
Yes. So
well, I don't want to go too far down the dragon theorizing, but I can't stop thinking.
The dragon's gullet?
Well, I can't stop thinking about. There's that quote in the World Book from Septon Barth about if to kill a dragon you have to shoot it in the eye. You can't shoot down its throat. Only death comes out that way. That the dragon's throat is a passageway. And to me, that is the house with the red door. I want to say that's almost the queen, without a home is Nymeria. The ships, they fled. Yes. She's more of a water figure than a fire figure, but again, the Queen Nymeria looking for a home.
Yeah. So a little bit more about this. So then Royd says, first Melantha asks, she's like, oh, adventurous. The mom's been out all over the place. And then Royd answers, says, no, sociopathic. My mother did not like people, you see, not at all. Her crew had no love for her, nor she for them. So this is later in the mom's arc. This is later in the mom's story after a while. Her one great dream was to free herself from the necessity of the crew altogether. So then after she boarded New Home, she never touched a human being again or walked the planet's surface. So again, that's one of the details that's like Ares. And then she gets into how... And then Royd starts to get into how on the ship she wanted a mate, a companion. And Royd has to explain that he is a cross-sex clone. So Royd was made in a vat, essentially. I'm going to share this picture. No, I lost the picture. So it's a cross-sex clone. So there are lots of things, lots of carryover that we see again with Jaime and Cersei. They're essentially identical to each other. They are mirror images of each other.
Well, the Lannisters are fake Targaryens.
Right. And this is very typical of the way this is one of the stories that I call implied incest, because it's her mother, or it's Royd's mother, but it's not really, it's...
I think she was already dead by the time his physical body came out of the vat.
Right.
So,
it's a type of self-pollination. I've used that term to describe how Dany hatches her dragons. Is that whole event was essentially self-pollination. She learned the process along the way, subconsciously, tapped into her genetic memory, and that's it. Same with Cersei and Jaime creating those 3 dragon babies. There's the twincest.
And she likes Joffrey the best because he's most likely like her own cross-sex clone, because he's very like her, not just in looks but also in his mind. And
I'm sure George is dwelling on, I think the Greek, Cersei is narcissistic, and the story of Narcissus is someone who falls in love with his own
In love with
reflection
himself.
in a mirror. So there's the mirror thing again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So this is the picture I wanted to show you guys. This is some of the original artwork to the first story. This is all on my blog page if you want to take a look at it again. This is essentially Royd, and this is, you know, his whole amniotic sac. That is him as a little baby. But what I noticed with all of this stuff is all of the veins and everything, the way it's drawn,
It's like
and
a tree.
it's like trees. It's going to connecting to his brain. So, like visually, we have like a John Brand blood raven connection with to blood to trees and so forth, so on and so forth. And so that's a.
it also kind of looks like a mushroom, and Blood Raven has mushrooms growing out of his cheek.
Oh, wrong one.
Yeah.
Right.
And I also noticed with Royd's backstory, I also thought about Cersei and Jaime. But if we also think like how they eventually die, like the mother dies before Royd. So, and kind of Jaime, you can see Jaime as kind of like a Royd who tries to protect people from the worst of Cersei, right?
And in that relationship, Cersei is largely the villain of it, although society thinks they're both equally. Like, Cersei has drugged Jaime along with this, and as Jaime escapes her, they're increasingly at odds, and that's what Royd is he's not really on board with Mother's plan.
But it's eventually the mother also kills Royd, her clone. So that's kind of like, you know, with the whole story about Jaime being born holding her heel or something, and then they're gonna leave together, or
Yes. Yes.
I think that might be something we could see between Cersei and Jaime.
Well, and that kind of makes Brienne play the part of Melantha, even though she's not like dark aligned. She's the one pulling him away. I don't know.
No, but
Not sure what to make of that.
Yeah, well, Brienne is tree aligned, so tree is part of that whole like Terran free folk, green line. You know, with Brienne and her heritage to Dunk and having her new shield and the stars. Yeah, so that's her star drive. Yeah, so I mean, you don't have to. I don't think, at least, you have to. I don't think you have to squint too hard to see how Bran plays that role. Okay, so another part I want to talk about is Royd going silent, and it kind of doesn't seem like it's really that big of a deal that Royd goes silent in the story. You know, it's the crew at this point, they're all plotting and speculating and making these plans as to what Royd is, and we have to break down that wall. We have to get behind that wall. He's right there. We have to get him and find out what he is. They think he's a gas giant. They think he's this or that. You know, there's one point where like the record screeches and babies cry and people clutch their pearls, and because somebody says maybe he's a Harangan mind, and and we know that's not the case, but through that, Royd says one of my the most favorite line, let me just say that again, of mine in all of Martinworld, is through all of this plotting, Royd comes back and Melantha discovers that he has been listening to everybody. So now Melantha and Caroli, it's been confirmed with them that some of the speculation was that Royd is watching. It's kind of like, you know, the first men with the first of the first men with the trees before they made the pact to get along. I air quotes there. is the trees were always watching. So we get this part. We're listening, Northwind said suspiciously. What are you? And then Royd answers, I liked your guess about the gas giants, Royd said. Sadly, the truth is less dramatic. I am an ordinary Homo... I am an ordinary Homo sapien in my middle age, 68 standard if you require precision. The hologram you see before you is the real Royd Eris, or was some years ago. I am somewhat older now, but I used the computer simulation to project a more youthful appearance to my guest. So this also has a lot of the insinuations that people like Janos Slint apply to. He's one of the plotters that Janos Slint tries to get everybody at the Night's Watch worked up about. What is John? Oh, he's a warg. He has the mark of the beast on him. You know, he tries to degrade him and starts making up these wild stories, and we see that with Rob as well. You know, what Rob supposedly was doing in the battles, and then we see even some tales of that about Danny. The thing is there's always like a grain of truth in some of this. You just have to figure out which grain it is. So yes, Royd is always watching, but he's not a gas giant. He's not a Haringan mind. He's not evil just because he's, or plotting or whatever, just because he's watching. And so sadly the truth is less dramatic. I love that line.
And it's good. We believe it with Bloodraven. Like, you know, he didn't do the bore, and he doesn't do it and that. He's just watching. He was watching.
So as you were saying, a lot of this, the value in doing these streams is that, like, I know those words, but it's just you'll put them together in a certain way, and it reminds me of other passages of text.
Oh, absolutely.
As you were saying that, I was remembering what Corin was saying.
The trees of eyes again.
Oh yeah, go over the mountains. That horse may go around. Make for the fist. Tell Mormont what John saw. Tell him that the old powers are waking. That he faces giants and wargs and worse. Tell him that the trees have eyes again. So that's,
yeah.
You know, they had eyes. They were shut off, and they have eyes again. That's the pattern we're seeing. And Corin, of all people, knows whatever he's been up to. He knows what that means.
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this is a cargo ship. They haven't had cargo or passengers for a very long time. And Royd took this job because he was interested in figuring out what this Volcran is. And he likes being around people. His mom doesn't like being around people. And telepaths like send her crazy, and to the point where she wants to kill them. And but it's Royd. Royd is the one that likes the people. He's the people person. That's on his resume.
Well, and like Jamie, he's essentially asserting his own. He's not just her clone anymore. He's an independent person with independent things that he wants and goals and feelings and desires. And that's what causes the drama to unfold. And that's kind of what Jamie's story is that his story isn't a redemption arc. It's about Jamie starting to actually be Jamie and not be Tywin's toy, or not be Cersei's toy, or not be the Kingsguard toy. Jamie is Jamie. My name is Jamie. And that's what Royd is. Royd is asserting who he is by, yes, we're going to take these passengers. Yes, we're going to do this thing.
So, and yes, and that brings us back to this particular part, section 20, where Royd goes silent. That's actually turns out to be dangerous. So if the trees aren't watching, if Royd isn't watching, that allows the red fire dragon mother, whatever you want to call her, that allows her to start her war, essentially.
Because that's when the eggs crack.
Yep. When there's not a watcher watching, when there's not this tree guy in his little library cave watching, that's when the dragons start their war. Which, to talk about Bloodraven for a second, I know there's a million theories out there about Bloodraven. I'm not necessarily trying to convince anybody of this, but the way it reads to me, and this also ties in heavily with another of George's stories called The Second Kind of Loneliness, which is reads like Bloodraven or Bran could have written this story. That's another live stream though. His job, as he says in that story, is to guard a hole in space. So the side of the Nightflyer gets a hole. We'll talk about that in a minute. Is blown out and has this big hole, and they're in space. That's literally, they're in a hole in space. The wall is going to get this big hole in space because it's a hinge of the world. That's where the dragons are going to come through. Bloodraven up in his cave is guarding this, whatever the hole in space is going to turn out to be. I kind of think it's going to be that, quote, back door, but that's where the dragons come through. That's their passage. That's their doorway, to reference another George story. But that's because there wasn't a watcher. We need these watchers
I just
on
had
the
three
walls.
ideas that we can't talk about right now because we'll be here all night.
Write them
Later.
down. Write them down. Yeah, so that is where our Rising Ashen comes to in space. So then we have the next section, which brings on a false long midnight. This is when the ice dragon starts to consume. Bless you.
Thank you.
And we'll call that out, that he actually refers to it as like false midnight or something.
Yes, that is exactly how. So we're on section 21 now. That's exactly how it starts. This is false midnight. The talks had broken up, and one by one, the academicians had gone to bed. Even Caroli de Brannon had retired, his appetite for chocolate quelled by his memories of the lounge. The Nightflyer was filled with silence. Okay. It's a long night. They're in a long night. The Nightflyer was filled with silence. This is, I don't know if many people remember this or not, because it's kind of just like slid in there, but it's a very deep, heavy nod. Euron gets the ship Nightflyer onto his fleet in Ice and Fire. And Euron also, the name of his ship is the Silence. So we have some like more of that that icy otherness with. That's why I've never been convinced, and I know I'm going to get like knives thrown at me for saying this. I've never been convinced that Euron is a failed Bloodraven or Greenseer student. There's too many things across all of Martinworld that support this from the back end, but it doesn't read that way to me in the story as well. But that's Shatterjack, right? Yeah, add that to your list of things to talk about later. So this section is where, reads virtually exactly like the Dragon Tamer Quentin's chapter. This is where the ice dragon first starts to really consume, and I won't go through the whole thing, but it ends with Lomi Thorne trying to go past security. She has this cord that's like jacked into her system like this. I don't know if you guys can, if I'm going the right way or not, jacked into her system like this, into her arm. So she has this whip-like extension coming from her. And Lomi is specifically trying to take over or capture the controls of this dragon mothership, and she doesn't succeed. And what is Quentin's last thing he says as he's going up in flames is, I know that has caused or created a ton of theories that what's going on with Quentin, and people don't think he's actually gone. I really, really do, because the very last thing that Lamy Thorne says is, "Oh," Lamy Thorne said, "as the cold coursed up her arm, she stopped whistling." And also her eyes start to sear, but it's all ice dragon stuff. This is all cold that's happening to her instead of a fire dragon. This is, go ahead.
Yeah,
Guys,
and that's
want to
also
add anything to that?
like not only Lomi dies in there, but it's Alice too.
Yes,
And
yeah.
I know you think of Agatha as kind of Lisa because she
Parts of
gives
her.
the Esperanto tale, yeah.
Mhm.
But I think Alice is also a Lisa for another reason, for two reasons. Like Alice, she's called Alice Northwind. Now, Lisa isn't in the north, but there's a lot of wind around the Erie and Giants' lands, especially in the chapter where Sansa goes down. And there's like the whole description of the Erie is with the blue marble vein. It's cold and
Yes.
icy and
Yes.
spidery.
Right.
And then Lisa is not just only depressed and mad, but she also lets physically go of her. She's and she smells like she doesn't smell of because she doesn't shower like Alice, but she smells of sour milk.
Right.
And so she kind of like, and she lets her figure go, and she doesn't
Right.
take care of herself anymore that well. And that's something that's specific for Alice. And then, of course, if you change the name, like Alice is like an anagram of Lisa.
Right.
And
Same letters,
how does,
just mixed around.
Isn't
how
that
does Lisa die?
Alyssa's tears? Isn't that?
Yeah, and Lisa dies by being shoved out of the moon door. How does Alice die?
Right.
She is pulled out of that moon, that essentially dragon
broken
moon
moon.
door.
Yeah,
Right. The broken moon.
out
Yep.
of the broken moon. So that's another thing. It repeats with several characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's kind of one of these things that where you can really think, oh, okay, that's Alice, Alice.
So anybody watching this now or in the future, I just want to kind of remind or point out that George has said multiple times that he reuses his ideas and whatnot from old stories into A Song of Ice and Fire. If you do want to see or read some of these quotes, then on my blog, just go, that's what it is, fattestleechoficeandfire.com. On that front page, I have listed them out because I know people over the years have totally thought that I was totally crazy about some of this stuff, but literally George says this. So thank you for following along so far. Okay, so now we're going to get, well, it says it's Act 3, but it's really like the fourth section. So we're starting to get to some of the disastrous results and some more reveals that's going on. So this brings us to section 22. This Lamy Thorne tries to steal the dragon, and she fails. So the moon door opens up, and they are sucked out through the cold. And that's it. That's how they die. So then we go on to section 22. Alarms were hooting everywhere. The passengers began to stir. Melantha Gerald tumbled from her sleep web and darted into the corridor, nude, frantic, alert. Caroli de Brannon sat up drowsily. The Psy-Psych muttered fitfully in drug-induced sleep. Rajan Christophorus cried out in alarm. So what they do is they convene, and they're like, what the hell is going on? And Christophorus, he starts to get red-faced and angry. He's like, you killed them. He's talking to Roy. He's like, you killed them. He started to say more, but Melantha slipped her hand firmly over his mouth. The two linguists exchanged a long, meaningful look. Do we know how it happened, Captain? Melantha asked. It's just like Bowen Marsh sat red-faced when in A Dance of Dragons, John was at 5, 6, 7, 8. John 8 stepped in Celador, drank some wine. Othel Yardwick stabbed a sausage with his dagger. Bowen Marsh sat red-faced. And also in here, Bowen Marsh is the only one. John has invited them in for a council. So that's what's happening here in Nightflyers. They're having a council right now because something tragic just happened. Right. Bowen Marsh is the only one that did not partake in the the host offering of food or drink. And we see that Bowen Marsh later had his role to play, whatever it might be, like in the mutiny attempt on John. That is what Christophorus is. He's going to be the next one that is going to make the mutiny attempt on Captain Royd. So they're having this big council, and then they're like, Royd Eris is killing us. He's killing us. So what they've decided to do, what they really are realizing is no matter what, the first thing that needs to happen is they need to go fix the hole in space. So this is kind of like the Night's Watch having to rush to stop more of the influx of the Ice Dragon others coming in. And this is where we're going to start to get more into the John Night's Watch arc in the Winds of Winter. This is sort of foreshadowing a little bit of some of the plot details that I'm fairly very confident will be in there, and to some degree. So again, Melantha laughed. Drifting, you said. How bad is the damage? Serious, but not dangerous. Hold 3 is a complete ruin, hanging from my ship like a half-broken egg, but the damage was confined. The drives themselves are intact, and the Nightflyers' computers did not seem to suffer from your system's destruction. I feared they might. I have heard of phenomena like electronic death traumas. So this happened because there was no watcher. And what does old Nan tell Bran is the watch is only as strong. I'm going to mess this up now.
As long as the watch remains true.
As long as the watch remains true. That is, the wall will remain as long as the watch stays true. Blah, sorry.
Well, and the state of the ship is kind of the state of the Night's Watch, that they can't really, they can't do any of the things that like a military organization is supposed to do. They're just basically barely holding the door closed with a couple hundred guys, and that's where the ship is. It can't really travel. They're not going to die immediately, but they can't also really do anything.
And what does Rojan end up doing? He's trying to get a hole in the wall with his laser.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and he enters the ship through the back door and sneaks up to them.
Bingo card.
But I'm stealing your thunder, so go ahead.
No. We've all read this. We all know. So then
we're definitely going to go long if you haven't noticed.
There's also
we
another
are definitely going to go long.
And
we have at least half an hour more.
There's another mutiny where that I think of when with Christophorus, because he drinks so much. He kind of reminds me of Robert Baratheon, and he's also very stubborn, and he's also like, and there's Robert's Rebellion,
right?
And at some point, he like with Bowen Marsh, we say he wants to eliminate John, but he doesn't want to be he doesn't necessarily want to be the Lord Commander. But like, yeah. Robert eventually takes power from Aerys and become powerful, so to prevent Targaryens or Aerys or Royds or the mother from being in power. That's kind of why he took the power, so that others wouldn't.
Well,
He didn't
that
like
is
the power, but he did it so others wouldn't.
well, right. That's the thing I was going to say about. That's one of the reasons I pretty strongly agree that the King Bran thing is going to be a thing based on what was happening in the show, and everybody hated it, but that dynamic is actually that was a really common thing in English history of the English crown, and George talks about all the time, like especially like in the like the Dunk and Egg stuff and the stuff that's going to come after that during Egg's rule, that there are a lot of people that don't necessarily like Ned doesn't want power. He just doesn't want the Lannisters to have power. And
Yeah.
but and that's always the dynamic with lords. Everybody would be much happier with a Jaehaerys, like a decent king who just you don't have to be great. You just have to keep my neighbors from attacking me, keep the order, keep the roads clear, keep the taxes reasonably low, and nobody minds. And so the Targaryens, that's why every other Targaryen is bad, is a problem, is because everybody's fine with the monarchy as long as there's a good king. But when there's a bad king, the lords, this is like the Northern Conspiracy or whatever, the idea that John Aaron and other people are like, Aerys is nuts. Like the realm is going to fall apart. We need to take care of ourselves. And they start to build alliances between themselves. So this dynamic about whether power is centralized or distributed, it's like the tide. It goes in and it goes out. King Bran actually solves that problem, because if King Bran is a Fisher King archetype, he's not going to have an heir.
Yes.
So my vision of what the end game is there is a character in the Reach that they talk about him. He sat on the throne for like 80 some years. I think King Bran is going to be one of those figures where everyone is going to be happy with Bran being the king, because that means he's not going to produce an heir. And
Yes.
so their enemy houses, like assuming all the houses stuck around, that the Starks would be okay with that, because that meant a Lannister wasn't the heir, and the Lannisters would be okay with that because it meant the Starks wouldn't have an heir. And that by the time, I think the last chapter is Bran going to be on his deathbed reflecting back on his 100-year reign, and basically everybody that remembers the old feudal system from before, where we are in the books, will have died off. And that George's, this is a political analog, that the feudal system was inherently bad because only one person could hold power, and it's going to be a much more blended view in the future. And a King Bran character accomplishes that same thing. He's a placeholder that everybody can agree with, in the same way that the during Jon's election, Sam plays that dynamic that well, I don't want to be the Night's Commander or the Night's Watch Commander, but I definitely don't want that other guy to be the Night's Watch Commander. And so there's a gap that occurs in the middle. And so for that dynamic to happen for Jon, and then that dynamic to happen for Bran, there's a nice symmetry there. That's a preview of what I think we'll eventually see, is that Bran will be the compromise candidate. People are like, well, what do we do? The realm's in pieces. We need to rebuild. We'll just put this guy in charge, because everybody can agree he's not a threat to me. And that's how he's an unking. That's how you neutralize political powers. You put somebody who doesn't want the job in the job.
And I think George, quite possibly one of the reasons why we had the Kingsmoot with the Greyjoys go the way it did, with Euron on top, was to show the counter effect to the whole voting system, because the Kingsmoot actually has a lot thematically in common with the Night's Watch vote.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so we have more connection, future foreshadowing to Bran getting to be the new leader. I don't think they're going to use the same word king. I think there's going to be a lot of social changes to this, but Bran makes the most sense as far as societal progress.
I was going to say Ironborn thing, this may not be historically accurate, but in the literature, that's traditionally that pirates were very democratic. That basically it was very much like the wildlings, that you didn't get to be a pirate captain by just pushing people around. You had to treat your people well because they were armed and they were pirates and they wouldn't put up with that. So all pirate crews were essentially consensual, and so obviously the Ironborn are very much like, George's pirates. But to the idea of the Night's Watch basically being a sea fleet, they're kind of living that pirate lifestyle where they get to elect their leader by consent of the group, and they're a ragtag bunch of societal outcasts, are very piratey to begin with.
Mhm.
Okay, so I put the picture of the original artwork of the Nightflyer back up because this is where we are in the story. So Royd, the alarms are set off because of the breach in the wall. Royd wakes Melantha. They have another discussion, and he opens up to her a little bit more, and they start to develop a plan. And they're like, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to keep ourselves alive from, and more of us being sucked out into space. So my cursor is going crazy. And then, so that brings us to out in dragon space. And this is where Christophorus, Christophorus, all of this build up tension with him really starts to come to the forefront, and he makes things worse. So we're at section 24 now. And it says, outside, it was as though some vast animal had taken a bite out of the stars. Melantha Jurl waited on her sled close by the Nightflyer and looked at the stars. It was not so very different out here in the depths of interstellar space. The stars were cold, frozen pinpoints of light, unwinking, austere, more chill and uncaring, somehow than the same suns made to dance and twinkle by an atmosphere.
Again, they're in the cold and they're riding sleds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And only the absence of a landmark primary to her reminded her of where she was. In the places between, where men and women and their ships do not stop, were the Vulcan sails, crafts, and possibly ancient. She tried to pick out Avalon's sun, but she did not know where to search. The configurations were strange to her, and she had no idea of how she was oriented. Behind her, before her, above her, all around, the starfield stretched endlessly. She glanced down, or what seemed like down just then, beyond her feet, in her sled and the Nightflyer, still expecting more alien stars. And the bite hit her with an almost physical force. In Song of Ice and Fire, it starts with Craster. It's quite often mentioned that the bite is the cold.
Right.
Or it could be the hit of an axe.
Say that again.
The bite could also be from an axe.
Oh, the hit of an axe. That's what. Yes, that was my next thing. The bite is either the cold or it's a blade. And yes, I totally agree with that.
Again, when you're talking right there, I just got this vision of Sam and Gilly. Like she's like, how are we going to get through the wall? And he's like, I don't even know where the forts are. Like, he's literally traveling through the void. He doesn't know where he is. He's trying to find an entrance back. And that's when they're attacked by the others. Like, the two of them are literally, that's the closest thing to interstellar space, is the not knowing where you are, losing your bearings in the haunted forest. He says, well, we got to hit it eventually. But she's like, where is it? I don't know. It crosses the whole continent. We can't miss it. I think Jill's having a cat situation.
Oh,
yeah, cat situation. You heard something fall, and I'm going to distract it.
Speaking of tiny mutinies.
So, but also with this, and Shatterjack, tell me what you think. The way it's one of the ways it starts, where it's talking about it looked as the stars of or as if some vast animal had taken a bite out of the stars. That seems like a little Norsey mythy to me.
Well, it's H.P. Lovecraft. That Lovecraft brings that up
Okay.
all the time. That there'll be somebody looks up at the stars, and there'll be like there's a vast blackness, and then a blackness that's even blacker, like a hole torn in the cloth of the universe. Lovecraft was very fixated on the void between the stars are the normal thing. The stars don't scare you. It's the void between the stars are the scary thing. That's where the monsters live.
So there's a really good picture that I want to bring up for this section.
Again, Quaithe and her face being a mask of stars is very Lovecraftian as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's even in some of the other stories, the stars are very important. In Bitter Blooms, they're important. In the Stone City, when I'm forgetting the main character's name. Then it's like one of the things that he had to do was be able to like point out the stars in the
when
I
he's
made that
in the
analogy.
maze.
Well, he memorizes the names of the stars, and his father is proud of his ability to do that. And that's the same thing as Bran knowing all of the names of the fort along the wall. And Benjen, he repeats it from west to east and east to west, and Benjen talks about how proud he is of Bran. That's not just a modern era thing. That goes way back. I mean, Tolkien does that with the Mirror outside Khazad-dûm, where the dwarves love the mountain lake because you can look down from the mountain into the lake and see the stars above. And if the stars seem to burn brighter in the lake than they do in the sky. For being underground, the dwarves are strangely fixated on the sky, but just generally speaking, in old mythological context, the sky is a sea. The sun god rose across the sky ocean from east to west every day and that sort of thing.
So Melantha in the same section, Melantha, the part that I just read where she's out in space and she feels disoriented. I'm kind of thinking that we will see something about that with John when he comes back, and I don't know if we're going to see it like in a Bran chapter, but I feel like this is what John's experience is going to be when he is out of commission for a while after the mutiny stabbing. Because the last thing John feels is the cold. I don't know that. I'm not convinced at all that John is like dead the way.
But he's definitely been blown out the airlock.
He's been blown out the airlock. He's floating in space essentially right now. Right. He can't orient himself. And
there are people that wonder whether or not we're ever going to get a John POV, because there are people that believe in the fandom that that John will become one of those characters that we only see him from the outside. But you saying that tends to make me think that we will probably get at least one John internal POV going forward, so that George can say these things, because that's what he does, is he has these characters float through space adrift.
Oh yeah. So in this part right here, this picture, this is kind of like the whole under the sea thing, that sort of metaphor for going under the trees, under that ocean of trees, or green seeing. That's something that John
it's the upside down is the hanged man. Or hanged woman. It's an upside down figure, which is related with the Norse myth and also tarot cards.
Oh yes, especially with the tarot. I'm glad you brought that up. Sometimes I forget to mention the tarot cards. We know George knows about them because that's what his wife Paris was really into and does. But anyway, I totally agree with you.
Well, this is also the metaphor that it's in Ice and Fire, but it's actually mentioned earlier in the book that proximity matters, and if a telepath can touch someone else, they can communicate better. And then they literally touch their helmets together so they can communicate better. So they're pantomiming that as well,
Right.
Even though this isn't like a psychic connection. They're acting out the same scene.
Right. And another George story to read if you want to see this technique and this theme on page very strongly is A Song for Laya, where you still have that like psychic connection, but especially they talk about touch. Touch is what heightens this connection for whatever reason they need to connect. But I'm going to gush for a second because a lot of people think that George is such a downer, has no romance or anything in his body, but heck no. This scene right here, there's not even any sex in this scene, but this is how they're touching. This is how they're connecting. And let me just read this part right here. So they're on the outside of the ship. The rest of the crews have been out there. Royd had to get into his own special sled to be able to get through the wall. It says, she watched him approach, curious, wondering what would he look like. In her mind were a half dozen contradictory pictures. His genteel, cultured, too formal voice sometimes reminded her of the dark aristocrats of her native Prometheus, the wizards who toyed with human genes and played Baroque status games. At other times, his naivete made her imagine him as an inexperienced youth. His ghost was a tired-looking thin young man, and he was supposed to be considerably older than the pale shadow. But Melantha found it difficult to hear an old man talking when he spoke. And then a little bit further down, Royd's sled was large, long oval plate with 8 jointed grappling arms bristling from it like the legs of a metallic spider.
Spiders. There's a lot of spiders.
So what he physically looks like. But when he finally came near, and if any of you know Fever Dream, this is Joshua York as well. When he finally came near enough for Melantha to see his face, it was just a face. White, very white. That was the predominant impression she got. White hair cropped very short with a subtle stubble around the sharply chiseled lines of his jaw. Almost invisible eyebrows beneath which his eyes moved restlessly. His eyes were large and vividly blue. His best feature, his skin was pale and unlined, scarcely touched by time. So he did look wary, she thought, and perhaps a bit frightened, and he should be. So yeah, I mean, just that physical description, like the white on top of the white with the eyes. And now I know in here he has blue eyes, but the eyes that he watches from as a watcher on the ship is a red eye. So that's where we get Ghost with the red eyes. That's where we get these white weirwood trees with the red eyes and red sap and all this stuff.
The whiteness.
Yeah. And that's not to be confused.
The raven wings.
Yes. And that's not to be confused with a capital W, like White Walker other. Mm-hmm. That's totally different. That's actually more related to the Vulcan. And let me change this out here. In the story, The Glass Flower, that's another story. And I'm just going to go over this real quickly, where the Vulcan is specifically mentioned. And it's mentioned with 600 years ago, a creature known in legend as the White landed among the Crow and Denny in the first starship they'd ever seen. So this is these are called the Whites. The White was like that in me. It was a frog from a pond beyond ours, lost in space, going from star to star. And what they do is they land on this planet on Crow and Denny, and they manipulate this mind game. They manipulate the whole mind game system. The game of mind is actually what it's called. The white came down, and then the artifact is the object that it uses. But then this little girl that looks exactly like Daenerys, who is that fiery roll in the glass flower. She says, "Whatever I am, the white was first." So again, we have a counter or an example of two dragons being the same but different. So they're constantly like bashing, head to head, going head to head with each other. So we have the White Walkers and Targaryens.
Well, and the Vulcan is kind of like the artifact in that it's kind of inexplicable. Like it's never really it's described, but it's not ever really explained. It just enters the story from stage left and moves through the story in the same way that like he doesn't go into any detail about the white. Like the white had to come from somewhere. The artifact had to come from somewhere. There's a backstory, there's a culture, but we're just never going to get this. It's like the red comet. It appears one day and in the world and starts to have an effect and things happen, but George is not going to go. We're never going to get a world book about where it came from, and there's not going to be a prequel. It just falls from the sky like an alien object and starts the plot rolling.
So, and then we get to the next section where section 29, I've titled it, the Misa is identified, because that is when Royd, this is right after they're outside, they're fixing the hole in the ship. And Melantha's like, okay, what happened? Tell me what happened. You're holding back on something. And then that's when he has to say, it was the mother. It was the mothership. It was the Misa. That is, messing with everybody. And at this point, Christophorus has gone back in to the ship to try to get to the heart of it, to try to get at Royd, to kill him, to capture him, to do something to him. And except the mother gets to him first. And because she essentially wants everybody off of her ship, and she wants just Royd back. She's very jealous of the relationship that Royd has with Melantha. That's another something.
I'm getting a lot of Jamie and Brienne in the hot tub scene here, where they have this confessional where she says he finally comes clean and tells her the truth, and all of a sudden they're a team. And Cersei wants him back, and he's like, "No, I have my own agenda now. I'm Jamie."
And Cersei starts to lash out and make a big mess
again,
of it all.
while they're in a tub together, naked.
And then Jamie stands up and falls into her because he's weak and he can't stand on his own. And they have that touch.
Strong one. She's the improved model.
She is the improved model. That's exactly what it is. She is the support that he's going to need. So yeah, this is where we see the mothership starting to do some corpse handling, because Talib died earlier, and what they did is they had to tie him up down in the cargo, one of the other cargo holds. But now, since the hole broke free, things are all discombobulated all over the place. Things are floating around, and we have this dead body that's being controlled by the mother other that is she's using
Techie.
Yes, techie. The telekinesis she's using as her physical manifestation to hunt down these other people. That's what she's doing right now. She's hunting down these other people,
and eventually she uses his laser against him, his own weapon. He gets a hole. Instead of getting a hole into the wall, she gets a hole in his body.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm giving Leech the opportunity to say probably the second or third most favorite thing she says about the.
Yeah.
About the what? Hold on. Wait, what's my favorite thing to say?
The red smile.
Oh, yeah. The laser goes across. Laser goes across his throat. So that's like, we got some Lady Stoneheart in there. You know, gives this red smile.
Robert has a red smile too.
And
He
there's
has
another
blood on his lips.
Right. Oh, wasn't there somebody else too that had the red smile? So I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
Well, Melisandre says that about Patchface. His lips are dripping with blood.
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Which is a dream. It's not a reality, but that's the image she's getting.
Right.
Which implies that, Patchface is, again, being corpse handled by something. Because the red smiles are things that corpses have.
So we enter the drive room, and then we get the red smile. We get the corpse handling, and then we start to get to then we have a scene that's back outside.
Right.
And to section 31, it says the Nightflyer was a distant star sparked by its nuclear engines. Blackness and cold enveloped them, and below was the unending emptiness of the Tempter's veil. But Curly de Brannon did not feel afraid. He felt strangely transformed. So that's an interesting turn of phrase to use when you're faced with this icy other, is you are transformed.
Well, this reminds me of Bran's fall towards the icy spires.
Mm-hmm.
Like the threat Bran thinks about, as the ground comes up at him, he can see 1,000 other dreamers impaled on ice spikes. Like the threat is coming towards him, and it's not really. It's relativistic effects. He can't really tell if he's falling or the ground is moving, because it's that kind of weird weightlessness sensation. But the danger is getting closer and closer and closer. And in his case, he doesn't fly away. He doesn't go, like he doesn't get in the ship and fly away. He's left behind, right in the path of the Vulcan.
Let's see if here we go. And this is another oddity that George has a thing with disembodied parts coming back to haunt people. He's done it in the skin trade. Yeah. There, Jamie's hand, this eye comes floating back. So we're talking about a story where there's a lot of psionic connection here, this third eye idea, and there's this eye that comes back to haunt.
Well, and I'm if we're taking a betting pool, I'm pretty sure that Euron's going to pull one of his eyes out and it's going to roll around on the floor before this is all over, just because that would be so Euron.
Yeah, and then there's one of the Umbers, I think, that has the
glass eye.
The glass eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So could be.
Yeah. Well, that's the story, is that the crow ate his eye.
Yes. I usually have to keep a cheat sheet for the Umbers sometimes because I get them confused. Yeah, so I don't know what it is about George and these disembodied parts. And actually, I was rewatching Doorways last week or the week before, and I had the book at the same time, going like line by line. And one of the first things that happens is somebody gets their nose bitten off too. So, and it,
this is the Thousand Eyes in One too, because Royd controls all the cameras and the speakers, but the mother controls the eye.
So this is the one. This is not the 1,000, but the 1,001st. This is the 1,001st eye we have. So yeah. Okay, so then we talked about this a little bit earlier. So then gravity returns. So what happened is they were all outside. They come back in. They're trying to get things patched up, and the mother has too much power because she's turned off. All the gravity's been turned off, so she has power in weightlessness, and where the humans don't. Except for Melantha. Melantha is the one that was said was to be comfortable in weightlessness. Because she's an improved model. And so what Royd has to do in order to help the humans survive is he has to get in there and get around this dragon thing and turn the gravity back on. So he gets in there and
the flying doesn't happen anymore.
Right. And
put the dragons back to ground, get their wings, clip their wings off.
But as this is, as Royd says, Knives suggested Melantha. By all means, is Techie still a threat, Captain? Mother is vastly weaker in a gravity field, Royd said. So she has to fight it. Even boosted by the Nightflyers' power, she can only move one object at a time, and she has only a fraction of the lifting force she wields under weightless conditions. But the power is still there, remember. Also, it is possible she will find a way to circumvent me and cut out the gravity again. From here, I can restore it in an instant, but I don't want any likely weapons lying around, even for a brief period of time.
I want to say my favorite sentence from this whole thing is where he tells her to get another spacesuit. Is there a hole in your suit? She says, yes, get another one right now. That's the most sensible thing anybody has ever said in a horror story. Because inevitably the people are like, oh, there's a killer in the house. I'll check the basement. You go to the attic. Like, the sensible thing to do is if you have an opportunity, hide the weapons and fix your suit now before it gets worse. And that just never happens in a story like this. I got to imagine George sitting in a darkened movie theater going, no, you idiots, fix your suit. And then frantically scribbling notes. If I ever write a story about somebody getting stabbed in space.
Yes, they are going to fix their damn suits. I'm going to make a suit rip, and then it's going to be fixed.
All right.
Which this is an important detail to the story, and it's a small detail, but it's an important detail to the story because it's actually one that they included in the 1986 movie, like almost line by line, like situation to situation. It was imperative that Melantha gets a hole in her suit that she has to change. But the thing is when she changes, that's when she has this nice white suit. It's kind of like Val returning wearing essentially this whole white outfit to John's whole black outfit.
Right.
And that is...
Well, she's definitely powering up for the next scene.
Right. I'm losing my cursor. So... Oops. Not that one. You don't need my face that big. Yeah, and I put a picture on my blog mixed in with everything. Let me see if I can find it real quickly, because it's worth noting, because it's something that happens almost directly back into Ice and Fire. I think I put it on here. Well, no, I didn't. And then, there's even there's even elements of shadow babies in here. So they're back inside the ship. The mom's going like crazy, messing with the gravity, making it so, the humans can't function, but she's at the height of her abilities. And then,
that people, even if they have broken legs, they can still if they're controlled by techie, they can still move. Sam experiences that with the whites. He confronts with Jilly, like, they're like, yeah, they're still moving even if their guts are piling out and everything else.
So in section 33, there's even like hints or small nods to like a future Shadow Baby idea. Something was moving across the stars, dimly and far off. De Brannon could see it, though he could not yet make out the details. But it was there. That was unmistakable. Some vast shape that blocked off a section of the starscape. It was coming at them, dead on. He wished he had his team with him now, his computer, his telepath, his experts, his instruments. He pressed harder on the thrusters and rushed to meet his Vulcan. So yeah, De Brannon now sees this ice dragon for himself, this Vulcan. It's still a ways off, but it's huge. Remember, it's like big enough to, like, an animal took a chunk out of the sky, a bite out of the sky. But it's appearing at this point almost like a shadow figure. There's a lot in common with that very short section that George has, expanded with the Catelyn section when she sees the Shadow Baby with Renly. Okay, then we get to the next section, and pinned to the floor, hurting, Melantha Gerald risked opening her suit's comm. She had to talk to Royd. "Are you there?" she asked. "What's happening?" The pressure was awful, and it was growing steadily worse. She could barely move. The answer was pained and slow in coming. "Outwitted me," Royd's voice managed. "Hurts to talk." So now we're back inside. So, and what's going on right now is, with these chapters or sections going forward, is we're going quickly between, we have a battle with an ice dragon and we have a battle with a fire dragon happening, pretty much at the same time. This is the Dance of the Dragons again. This is what we're going to be getting in the future of Ice and Fire. And
I was thinking about Abner Marsh and Joshua York. Joshua York as being the vampire is pinned to the floor by sunlight and he can't move. And I think Abner's actually got a broken arm or something at this point, and he's on the floor and can't get up.
Yes.
And they're talking back and forth.
Yes.
So you got to pull yourself together,
Yes.
and
absolutely
muster this one final effort to save the day.
And that is literally what we're reading into, about to go into at this point, is the dragon mothership has turned that, instead of turning off the gravity, she has ramped it all the way up. So, again, the dose makes the poison.
So she makes Royd being powerless because his heart could fail under all that pressure.
Right. Exactly. So the one person that can help them can't help them right now. And Melantha has to muster through with this one last, quest, which is to get to this control unit for the gravity situation, to try to return it back to normal. So we go on a little bit with that. And then, so what is the Vulcan? We get a very lengthy description about it by Caroli, and it's very nice. And actually, it happens in a few sections. Some of the sections are a little bit longer. Some of them are really tiny. We covered this a little bit when we first started streaming, but I'll just read this one part. "It is not truly a ship, not as I thought it would be," Caroli de Brannon was saying. His suit, Academy designed, had a built-in encoding device, and he was recording his comments for posterity, strangely secure in the certainty of his impending death. So he's writing this stuff down, essentially. This is what happened before in Ice and Fire. This is the stuff that John sent Samwell down into the library to try to research about the others. So essentially, Samwell is reading these notes by Caroli de Brannon. He says it's vast, vast. I have nothing but my wrist computer, no instruments. I cannot make accurate measurements, but I would say, 100 kilometers, probably, perhaps as much as 300 across. Not a solid mass, of course, not at all. It is delicate, airy, no ships as we know ships. No city either. It is so beautiful. It is crystal and gossamer, alive with its own dim lights, a vast, intricate kind of spiderwebby craft. It reminds me a bit of the old star sail ships that they used once in the days before the drive. But this great construct. And then he goes on, and then he says, the Vulcan craft has no visible means of propulsion. In fact, I wonder how perhaps it is a light sail, a laser launched millennia ago, new, torn, and rotted by some imaginable catastrophe. But no, it is too symmetrical, too beautiful. The webbing, the great shimmering veils near the nexus, the beauty of it. So it goes on for a little while.
So let me give you a quote to just compare and contrast. This is from a Lovecraft story. The blackness from the stars is an immobile blob of living sentient darkness torn from the primal fabric of the cosmos at the center of the universe. Is distinguishable in darkness only as a vaguely shimmering oily pitch. Although intelligent, it speaks no known language and ignores attempts to communicate. So you can almost see George going, oh, that's a good idea, but you know how it would really go? This is what it would be like. like if that really was a thing, what would cultures think about it? What were the stories they would tell about that if it actually existed?
Right. And I would love to know, if I could ask George a question, it would be, since he does put so much importance on the names of things, like what does the Vulcan mean? I've never been able to really find a good answer, or any answer really, on what that was derived from.
What I would say, if I'm going to assign it something, is that it's defined by what it does. It doesn't really matter where it comes from or what it truly is. It matters what it does to the people that witness it.
It's like Agatha. Finally, she wakes up and she gives the answer. Like it's an animal. She can feel it's like it's not even alien. It's more like an animal. And
right.
doesn't have any. It doesn't have any really good self-awareness. It's got a big brain, but it's all about food and what it wants to eat is matter, and that's why it goes to that veil. Because
I think the question would annoy George because he'd be like,
"He doesn't want to answer. He doesn't want to give details."
Don't think about that. Look at you're here to pay attention to Roy and Melantha and the mother and the characters in the story. Don't worry about that. Here.
So we have a possible answer. One to bookmark. Somebody write it down. That's a good option. That's a very good option. So just something that I posted earlier. So this is true, but it's also like for fun. Is on the screen on the right here. That is the artist's rendition of the Vulcan, and if you read the story, it really is just like that. I've joked before that it's and actually Shatterjack, the last time we talked, you kind of mentioned it as well. So two people saw it, so theory confirmed, I guess. I'm just kidding. We both thought of it as like a jellyfish in space, or like a man of war in space, because remember, a gulf of space or a gulf of water is kind of the same in George world. So this is like a man of war, and there's also a lot in common with the Seven in this, because the Seven have their fiery aspect with them, especially here. So that was just kind of a fun little comparison that I noticed earlier today.
I sent you a link if you want to put it on the screen. There, if you remember, there was I think it was a first season Star Trek Next Generation. There was a crystalline entity, which is a strange, alien intelligence that looks like a giant crystal snowflake or tree that travels in the void between space. That's in my head. That's what I see when I hear him. It's more, George's version is more colorful. The crystalline entity from Star Trek was just literally like clear, like a chandelier in space, clear crystal. But it was like it was representing like a neural net.
Well, I'm pretty convinced that that is what the crystal crowns that the Septons wear.
Right.
That is a form of a neural net, mind controlled antenna or something. It's
Well, the visual image I have is, that fungus that takes over ants' bodies, where like the ant will get zombified and like a little fungus fruiting body will grow out of the top of their head. That's kind of what I imagine the Septons are. Is like they've got, it's like the Grishka, but what happens when the Grishka grows fruiting bodies? Like instead of just being like a cap, like it actually starts to put out antennas so it can send spores or something. That's kind of the imagery. Because the Septon, they talk about the last Septon, it's like the crown was twice as, it was like it was weighting him down. Like it was literally like a parasite that had attached himself to him. They talked about the Septon was, even if he'd stood up, he was a tiny old, feeble old man, even if he stood up straight, but the weight of the crown he had him bent almost double to where like his head was down at like at Cersei's waist level because of the weight of the crown on it.
Yeah,
it really does read like a parasite.
What also, and what the Vulcan also has, in my opinion, like with the thing that Agatha says, like, it's actually just an animal without little self-awareness that just kind of go for food, and it has its own instinct going. It lives in space, travels through space, but it's going for matter, and are aligned with the Septons with their crystal crowns on their heads. It's also said like the special elite of brothers, where the knights get part of it. They wear hair shirts, and hair shirts, they're worn inside out. So the hair is worn inside and the skin is outside. So it looks like just skin, but on the inside it's an animal. It has a pelt. It has so something may look like a human outside, but on the inside is actually just an animal with nothing. So that's kind of an idea that I think is part of the. But then it's like and combined with the spider web and the big ice spiders, and
Right. Well, the quote that I was thinking of is in Cersei 2, Feast for Crows. The High Septon met with them at the top of the steps, a bent old man with a wispy gray beard who was so stooped by the weight of his ornate embroidered robes that his eyes were on a level with the queen's breasts, though his crown, an airy confection of cut crystal and spun gold, added a good foot and a half to his height. So it's very spiderwebby. And it occurs to me that the characters that are the most sympathetic, like Robb and Tommen, their crowns never fit. And Catelyn thinks a crown should never be comfortable. So there are certain characters where it seems like the crown is an affliction, and there are other people that kind of never really take to wearing a crown. Tommen keeps taking his off, and it annoys Cersei. Which is why we like Tommen, is he doesn't want it.
Yeah, like this. Here we go. This is something else I was playing around with earlier today when I should have been working, and I was really just playing around with imagery. Yeah, that the High Septon with his crystal crown, it's, except this one doesn't look like an airy confection to me. That one looks like it would be like painfully.
Well, it just looks like a prism.
It does.
But you didn't include the Saruman quote about his robes looked white, but when Gandalf looks at them, they contains all the colors. And he says, "No, I'm not the cloak. It's not the cloak of white; it's the cloak of many colors." And he says, "He who breaks a thing to understand how it works is departed from the path of wisdom."
Let me see if I can find.
I am certain that's what George was going for, because it's that old killing the goose that laid the golden egg. George likes the mystery. Don't take it apart to figure out how it works. Just appreciate it for what it is. The people that take things apart, like us, are bad people. So, Don't ask those questions. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't ask what the Vulcan is. Just, it's a mystery. It's supposed to be a mystery.
Oh, yeah, I did have that. I was just reading that part again today. Oh, was that it? Yeah, let me bring it back up real quickly. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I like the white better. Yeah, and then he goes on.
The white light can be broken, in which case it is no longer white, and he who breaks the thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom.
That's it. That's what got me on it. Was I was looking up the quote about has lost the path of wisdom.
So it's breaking the truth into the seven.
Right.
George sees that as a bad thing. You should
Right.
just embrace things the way they are and not think about it too hard.
Yeah. Because the truth is less dramatic. That's what Royd says.
It really is black and white, is what he's trying to say.
I don't think it's quite black and white. I think it's just sometimes we readers overreach for things. Like we're the ones on the Nightflyers ship that are conspiring and trying to figure out what the heck Royd is.
Like the others are the gas giants of Pluto.
So what?
Yeah.
what year did he say that? Because I mean, I thought this pattern went back further than that.
What year did he say what?
Well, I mean, if he said the truth is less.
The truth is, yeah. Sadly, the truth is less dramatic. That was
there wasn't theory crafting in 79.
Yeah, that was like 78, 79 when he first wrote that.
Right.
So.
If you only had any idea.
So, we're in this final act now, and we go back and forth, back and forth. We have the struggle between like the mother dragon ship and the ice dragon others that are out in the cold space. And we have more corpse handling. There's one section in particular. Let me just make sure I'm reading the right one. Section 36, I call it, It Comes From Mom. And if you go on my blog, find it again. If you go on my blog, this whole story is written out with all of the notes in here. We're trying to encourage you to read at the moment with this live stream, just, giving you nuggets. So if you go here, you can find all this information. And I have it hyperlinked, like a list up top. So if you just want to quickly jump to sections, you can. You don't have to go through the whole story. But in section 36, George is doing another very typical thing that he does is he's giving the talent, the talent that the main character has, or a main character has, or a key character has, the talent that they have, like green seeing or skin changing or birthing dragons or something like that, genetically follows the mother. That is a common theme in his work. It happens several times. And another story where he's very explicit with it is Dying of the Light. So we find out through all of this crude shuffling, more corpse handling, the mom is sending this dead body after Melantha to try to kill her. The corpse came on. Yeah. So it gets to the point where it says, Sigh. Melantha wanted to curse it and cry. Vainly, she wished for a psi power of her own, a weapon to blast apart the techie-driven corpse that stalked her. She was improved, she thought despairingly, but not improved enough. Her parents had given her all the genetic gifts they could arrange, but Psi was beyond them. The genes were astronomically rare, recessive.
You don't say.
And suddenly it came to her. Royd's, she said, putting all of her remaining will into her words. She was weeping, wet, frightened. The dial, techie, Royd, techie it. And remember, they're being crushed by gravity right now. Yes.
Well, but I mean, this is the reversal. It's when your opponent pushes, you don't push back, you pull. That's
right. That's a very good.
Ricochet.
Yes.
What the reason I'm thinking about this is because when he says Ricochet, I just remember how incredibly popular Uno was in 1980, 1979. Everybody was going on about Uno, and Uno is the game where you play the reverse card.
Right.
Yeah.
Does everybody still have their bingo cards? Their Fattest Leech bingo cards? Because you know another game is Plotsy. Huh?
Right.
So
yeah, he's doing that judo thing where you use your enemy's strengths against them. She uses it against Royd, and then they're going to do the same thing against her. They're going to flip.
Right. His reply was faint, troubled. I can't. I don't. Mother. Only her. Not me. No, mother. Not mother, she said, desperate. You, always. Say mother. I forgot. Forgot. Not your mother. Listen. You're a clone. Same genes. You have it too. Power. Don't ever, or don't, he said. Never. Must be sex-linked. No, it isn't. I know. Promethean, Roy. Don't tell a Promethean about genes. Turn it. The sled jumped a third of a meter and listed to the side. A path was clear. The corpse came forward. Trying, Royd said. Nothing. I can't. She cured you, Melantha said bitterly. Better than she was cured. Prenatal. But it's only suppressed. You can. I don't know. The corpse stood above her. So he has this talent, but it's suppressed. And this is actually a lot like all of the Stark kids in Winterfell. And as much as we love Luwin, he's a maester, and the maesters don't believe in this green seeing magic and the wargs and all this stuff. So in a way, the kids' talents were being suppressed. And it took getting, I tend to think, and maybe you guys do as well, actually, I'm not sure, but I tend to think that it took getting the specific animal that opened up, that allowed them to have that vessel. Like the Starks had to have the wolves.
Far be it from me to root for Euron, but he's like, well, try. How do we know unless we try? And that's what Royd never tried.
Mm-hmm.
He's not wrong.
Right. And I also happen to think, and some people think that this idea is boring, but sadly, the truth is less dramatic. I happen to think that in the Night of the Laughing Tree situation, very briefly, that Lyanna was involved, but she was skin changing the horse, and it was Howland that was the knight, because it's these two things that come together that fight the bigger enemy. They have to work together. And I don't think Howland was necessarily, I don't think he was necessarily lying at anything. He possibly just didn't tell the full truth. Kind of like Royd in this situation. Like, he never really lied, but the truth was very slow to come out. It took a couple of chapters before the full truth actually came out. And I think that's where John got his skin-changing warg talent from, is actually his mom. Plus, it kind of makes sense to me with the whole dragons always consuming a horse in Ice and Fire. So
I don't hate it. I said
most people do.
Time ago, there was a video we will not link to about the
Starks and Blackwood.
Well, there's a video about George's weird ideas about genetics, and this comes out in Wildcards. Like, George's genetics are not Mendelian genetics that you learned about in biology class. He has a very, very specific and internally self-consistent way that he thinks it works, or that he asserts it works. And I've thought for a long time that I think what he's doing explicitly is he's showing us, like, his gender politics are that power flows through the male line, but magical power flows through the female line, and that all of these successions, like in the Targaryen, this is what happens over and over in the Targaryen civil wars, is this guy is technically the heir, but the woman is more qualified,
Yes.
or has, you know, some sort of magical aspect to it.
Yes.
I think that there is a hierarchy, but like I said, the like with Arya or whatever, the males get the political power, but the females get the magical power, and that leads you to some down some pathways that we don't have time to get into today.
Yeah, that's actually a good topic for another stream, is like, what are the color representations, the dragon representations, things like that. Going back to the George makes up his own genetics, I have been singing that song for a long, long time.
Well, then it's not random. It's not per story. That George actually has like a 3x5 card somewhere with how things work, and it always works the same in a George story.
Yeah, one of the earlier things, patterns that I noticed was the genetics of Targaryens and what they look like. And I actually did have a chance to sit with George and ask him about this, and he won't ever actually fully confirm anything, but he asked me a lot of questions, tried to trick me, and then when Fire and Blood came out a few years later, the one thing that I said I had a question about that it hinged on was the color of Rhaenyra's hair. And
he's like, funny that you would ask.
Funny that you would ask. Her hair
well,
is
you'll never get a positive note, but you can, if you corner him, he'll just stop talking, and that's how you know you've got somewhere.
So that's my.
I've been trying to come up with if I ever met George in an elevator, what would I ask him? Because he won't answer straight, but the trick is to get a question that he can't answer, and that's how you know you've touched something important.
Right.
No, it was about the like, if they have a mother that isn't Targaryen, then the first child has the hair of the mother and not the Targaryen hair. And then the second child will have the Targaryen hair.
Right. Yeah. Very, very briefly, it is that. It's like the first born child of non-Targ to Targ parent takes after the non-Targ parent, and the subsequent children, any other if there are children after that, child 2, 3, 4, 5, 14, they could look like anything. Mm-hmm. Generally, the second one looks like the Targaryen, but it's really that first one that matters, because that is the one that allows George to hide children in plain sight, you know, with their parentage.
Right.
So, then there's, so to finish this one off, we have gone so long. I can't believe this. Thank you guys for sticking with us, whether you're watching this live or you're coming back to watch this later. I cannot even tell you how much all three of us appreciate this. I know that we've been working hard on this for days, for weeks. Let me get to like the very final thing. So there's a line where Val comes back out of the woods and she's in that white suit. If you watch the movie is very explicit with this, because Melantha is wearing this very special white suit that she had to change into to protect her. And Royd is wearing this very specific black suit. And when Val comes out of the woods with Ghost, and John says it looks like they belong together, not everybody's going to agree with this, but George didn't put that in there for no reason. You know, he's not like short on word count or anything like that, and like he has to.
Right.
So what ends up happening in the end, so this is section 39, it's the very last one, is it looks as though they belong together. Essentially, we have that scene because Melantha and Royd, Royd wants Melantha to go. He's like, I'll drop you off at the next planet and I will just float in space on this mothership until both of our entities die. I'm paraphrasing there. And Melantha refuses. She's like, no. And so she stays on the ship. She's an improved model, so she has a slightly longer lifespan, but it's not eternal. The section starts with, I've held the Nightflyers' crystalline soul within my hands. It's a deep red, multifaceted, large as my hand, and icy to the touch. Because ice burns. In its scarlet depths, 2 small sparks of smoky light burn fiercely and sometimes seem to whirl. I've crawled through the consoles with wound my way carefully past the safeguards and cybernets, taking care to damage nothing. And I've laid rough hands on that great crystal, knowing it's where she lives. I cannot bring myself to wipe it. Royd's ghost has asked me not to. So she wants... What's that?
The Heart of Winter.
Yes, right. The Heart of Winter. The Heart of the Beast. The whatever, whichever way you want to look at it, it means the same, whether it's the ice dragon or the fire dragon. But what's interesting is with this ghost is there's still an eternal watch. There's still an eternal battle because Royd has to constantly make sure. So Royd has died. Let me just back up a little bit. Royd has died, and his soul has managed to essentially etch itself into the Nightflyer computer system. So he has become one with the Weirwood net, if you want to say it like that. And he has an eternal battle to keep the Fire Mother from killing the one person that he actually had real legit feelings for. The first person that he says that he touched, even though Melantha giggled a little bit and said, no, that's not really, that's one type of touch, but that's not the physical touch. So there's an eternal battle to keep the dragon at bay. And she wants to just end it. She's tempted to end it, but she doesn't. It says right here, for this 1,000th time, he offered to take me back to Avalon or any world of my choice, if only I would go outside and complete the repairs we abandoned so many years ago, so the Nightflyer might safely slip into Star Drive. For the 1,000th time, I refused. He is no stronger now. Their genes are the same, after all. Their power is the same. Dying, he too found the strength to impress himself upon that great crystal. The ship is alive with both of them, and frequently they fight. So, do you guys have any final thoughts on this last chapter?
Don't want to open a new topic. I got some thoughts. Always got some thoughts.
Then there's this was because we didn't really discuss that yet, but it's in the previous section with the corpse handling.
Mm-hmm.
That starts to happen when Christopheris tries to get the hole through the wall when he's doing the mutiny, like Bowen. And that's when the whites start to kind of act up, and that's kind of I truly believe that the others are on the other side of the wall during John's last chapter, and they're not there to kind of go through the wall yet, because even Christopheris doesn't manage to make go through the wall himself. He doesn't really finishes the hole, but um, there's enough leakage through the magic protection when John is stabbed for the others to animate the dead night watchmen that are buried in the lich yard,
Right.
like over the past centuries. Like they've been
Right.
starting to burn, they're dead, and but there's still a lot. The lich yard is still filled with corpses of hundreds and hundreds years old. And the moment, like you say, like when he feels the cold, it's the cold of the others at the other side of the wall. There's a lot of hints, like with Ghost acting out and the Raven
Right.
acting out, and everybody believes like, oh, it's maybe because of Bo and March, but actually Ghost is more aggressive toward John at some point than he ever is later to Bo and March.
Right.
And we get some points where John watches the wall and there's snow coming, and then later on, the Ghost is calmer. He's suspicious towards Bowen, but he's calmer than he was before toward John. And then he goes outside and the wind is coming from the south, and suddenly all the snow is coming, piling up against the wall. But the snow itself, it came from the north, so it was actually snow from the others coming across the wall, and then they changed the wind. So why was Ghost and Raven so up in arms? Because they smelled them. They smelled the others were near, and
Or
they
at
were
least the whites
crying.
or something.
And
Like
that's
they're
why the raven, he cries snow, 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 and everybody's used to like, oh, when the raven says snow, it means John. No, this time the raven was saying the snow, the snow, the snow. It's a sign. And so
I
kind
know.
of like that's what I think is happening, and we see that here too. Because when does the corpse handling happen? Right at the moment of the mutiny of Christophorus.
Right. Yep.
That sets it
Right.
off.
Well, and again in the first book, second book, whenever it was, when the whites awaken and try to kill Chiramamon, that they are literally, the Rangers are coming back dead because they're being sent out to figure out what's going on the wall, and just like those the variety of characters are trying to penetrate the ship to figure out what's going on, and they're being turned into whites and sent back as weapons to prevent people from stopping doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
It is a response. That's kind of been a fandom thing for a while. That, well, why did the others come back now? Well, they didn't come back. They've been poked. That something that has happened on this side of the wall has triggered them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if we think back to the prologue, that most likely the others are looking for a certain person, whether it's a Lord Commander or a Stark in particular or Jon Snow in particular. Yeah, there is. They've been watching. They've been doing their own watching. They probably have their own. God, the word just left my brain.
Night's Watch.
Prophecy. Thank you. They probably have their own prophecy. They're looking for somebody in particular. That's what poked to them.
The prince that was promised.
Yes.
The prince that was promised, that's gonna kill him. That's gonna be a threat.
Oh.
That's why they want Waymar. Like one of the things also here we have here with the eyes, and you mentioned earlier Corin too. Like he's smart enough to know to do certain stuff, but he's also smart enough to keep John away from icicles. And I believe that the others, they use ice to see, like ice and eyes. So there's a wordplay there. And so they can see through the wall. They can use the wall to watch everybody at Castle Black, etc. And every time anyone passes through the ice, through the wall, they know who's coming. And and that's why you have the Black Gate. The Black Gate is beneath the wall, beneath the ice, and so
Right.
the others would never know anyone coming through the Black Gate because they don't have any eyes on them. And so like, well, it's the idea that they were mistaking Waymar Royce for John has been around for a long while. But
Right.
if you can kind of trace it, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, so they saw through the wall, they saw Waymar Royce, who looks like a Stark, like, ooh, that's our Jon Stark. He's got a big black cloak and a black sword that
Just
looks
super
like
fancy.
it looks like Valyrian steel. It isn't made from Valyrian steel, but it looks like one.
Well,
And
right.
then,
He's the one guy that dresses like a lord. They comment on that everybody else wore Night's Watch stuff, but he
Yes.
showed up with his custom black armor and all
Yep.
the rich kid stuff.
Yep.
yeah, and he's lured into a trap to be killed by how many? 9 others? Were there
I
9
don't remember. They
I
said.
think there were
or 6?
6.
No,
I
there's
think
6.
there were 6. Yeah.
6 others. Like, it's an incredible number. And they slash the cloak and they splinter the sword. And Will is only attacked the moment he touches the sword. That's when it's not when he crawls out of the tree, it's when he grabs the sword.
Mhm.
When the splinters and he thinks like, oh, I'm taking that back for evidence. And
Right.
that's when Waymar is revived and as a white and kills him. And then you kind of have a chapter like John, he saves Georg, he gets the sword, and then you get this chapter like where he comes out into the courtyard and he's kind of shy. He doesn't want to brag, but everyone's like, "Oh, let's see the sword! Show the sword! Show the sword!" And he's
Right.
like, he's showing it. It's described like that everybody can see it very well. And then you're thinking like, yeah, well, and if the others are looking right now through the wall, they're like, shit, now he's got the
Right.
sword.
Wrong dude. Right.
Wrong dude.
They just checked off a spot in their bingo card.
Yeah.
We do have a question here in the chat.
Oh yes.
Leech.
Okay. Sorry. Let me get.
My answer to the question is that I have too many possible answers to be sure.
You have to favor one. Like, what's your favorite one, though? What would you like it to be?
Well, it's got to be a couple things. It's either Bloodraven going north of the wall, Bran being born, Jon being born. I mean, obviously, it's nothing on page because Ned. Maybe this has hit my head canon. I've had this idea that Ned and Benjen and probably Jorah Mormont and some other people have some sort of early watch system because Ned, when he hears some things about what's going, like when they find the wolves, Ned isn't shocked, but he's like, oh, yeah, let's not talk about that. Like it feels like there's more to it. Like he knew. Like his dad took him aside one time and said, "Oh, there's this thing you should know about," or So it sounds like this has been creeping up for a while. This wasn't just something that literally what happens in the prologue.
Right.
Was
the first, awakening. I totally agree. For me, I think they were looking for the Jon, whatever the Jon was. They were looking for the Jon.
Well, implied this has been going on since like Jon was born. Like there was something
probably
like the last 15 years or whatever they've been building up towards this.
I mean, if you think back to like the ideas that Rhaegar, what prophecies did he really know, or what bits of prophecy did he know that he was interpreting incorrectly? I think Bloodraven's been waiting for Bran, waiting for his replacement. It's just taken a long time.
The others, they must have been starting to become active at some point where Bloodraven chose to leave his Lord Commandership and get into the tree. He didn't do that just to watch everything south.
Well, right. But that was decades ago. So you kind of have to say, well, what have they been doing for the last X years? I don't know that there's not like a clear case of what it would be. Like if it was like, oh, we've never heard of this before, but George is kind of making gestures like this has been going on for a while. The Night's Watch is a little uneasy. They've been hearing weird stuff. And nothing really happens immediately.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question from Stormy. What did they want with John? To kill him?
I think they want to kill John. I think they want to kill John.
I think
kill him to white him and make him their new king, or just kill him to eliminate him.
To eliminate him, because he's the one thing that can stop them for whatever reason. He's the one thing that's going to be what is going to stop them from getting what they really want.
My suspicion is that because with all the ice dragon mothers and the fire dragon mothers, I think there's no Night King. They already have a leader. They already have someone who controls her mobiles, and that's a Ma, and that's a big ice spider queen. And she's on her ice lake, and she can see stuff. You know, she probably can see future or has visions. And I think she saw a vision there is a vision. That's my suspicion, that John ends up killing her. Because think about is a threat to her, and that he could really nullify her, and that's why she wants him dead.
And think about back to the vision Danny has. Do you have a song for him? He has a song. His is the song of ice and fire. That's like coded language of his is the battle or the war against ice and then fire. That's the title of the series. So he has to tamp down one, and as he's tamping down that one, it's going to seem like, ooh, yay, the fire dragons helped. And then all of a sudden you turn around and it's like, oh shit, there's the
fire
the dragon. Yeah, there's the dragon mother Ma. If you use your leech bingo card twice, I will allow you to stamp the Ananda Kane square twice. Because that is literally what happens with Ananda Kane in Armageddon Rag.
Now, I agree with Stormy's remark that he says, like, Craster has been sacrificing before John's birth. Yeah, that's like the others never totally left. I mean, they stayed away and they stayed in their own secluded stuff, but there have always been people who, including Craster, but also people of the Frozen Shore, who worshipped them, like and probably sacrificed. Yeah. So we don't know what the sacrifice does. It's believed that those sacrificed babies become others, but I'm like, baby and then big other looking like the previous ones.
Well, one of the features that these female other ice spider women have is that they're always sterile. They're always older, or maybe that's a feature of all dragons or something. But the not being able to produce children thing is a key part of that. So yeah, it's not like they're being born from eggs. There's something about again, that kind of goes back to Tolkien, the evil bad guy in Tolkien's cosmology can't create new life. He can only pervert existing life in a mockery of whatever. And so these ice mothers can't make life. Like, they can clone themselves asexually to produce Royd, but you couldn't produce children. And like Cersei doesn't actually reproduce sexually in the biological sense with anybody else. She basically clones herself and produces children by budding, like Joffrey just grows out of her side and cuts it off. Right. She doesn't want, and she's explicit about she does not want to be impregnated by Robert.
Oh yeah, and it's
She doesn't
Yeah,
want to allow it.
That's that self-pollinating thing that
So
we touched on earlier.
You should expect to see the same thing with whoever this entity is that
Yes.
they need infusions of life for whatever reason. About John, I was going to say John is very strongly the folklore version, especially in the French stories of the French idea of the loup-garou of the werewolves. John is totally a werewolf archetype, because werewolves are the traditional way you make a werewolf is somebody that was not bad enough to get into hell, but had done things that they couldn't get into heaven, and they were condemned to walk the earth, motherless, friendless, and damned. Like that literally is like John in the North is this eternal watchman, like not being able to ever truly die, like Benjen. Like that archetype of somebody just not being able to die, just trudging around in the cold North forever. That's a wolf-associated person. That's literally like the French idea of what a werewolf is, and that's just all over John's character. We should always remember that everything that you ever read about the Starks, everything that you read about, Rickon being wolfish, all of that stuff started with John. Like George closed his eyes and out of the mist walked Jon Snow, and everything else associated with the Starks, they only got that wolfishness because it relates to John.
Same with the Targaryens. Dany, especially if you look back through George's writing and like the stories like The Glass Flower, all Targaryens
are copies of Dany.
Are copies of Dany. They're all like little spokes or spawns of Dany. So any of the traits or characteristics that we get with the various Targaryens in history are because of Dany, and they're in some way, shape, or form a little bit of like hint. There's
Well, one of my beefs with the fans is that they think of Ned Stark as the prototypical Stark, and he's not.
No,
he's an aberration. He's much nicer than the Starks were historically. Historically, the people Starks used to be a lot more like Brandon and like what Jon is going to become, at least temporarily, and like what Rickon is. Those people are the Starkiest of the Starks. And that Ned is actually kind of a civilized one that went off to prep school and got a haircut and came back and dresses nice. He is not essentially of the North. And we like Ned, and we just assumed that all Starks were like that. But generally speaking, Starks were kind of jerks, like Brandon.
Yeah.
They were very fiery, very wolfish.
What? Yeah, the wild. Yeah.
The wolf blood. Yeah.
So I can't believe we've gone on this long. This is crazy. And to think we only hit like major bullet points on Nightflyers. We didn't even get into the Whisper Jewel. Melantha has a Whisper Jewel, a green Whisper Jewel that's on a silver chain. Again, that's back to like green seeing and Starky type stuff with Bran and his pin, and Val with her Weirwood pin. That's a
well, and she wears her Whisper Jewel between her breasts, and one of the women that's shot through with a laser, there's a hole in her chest.
Yeah.
Exactly through right in the center of her sternum where the Whisper Jewel would be.
Yeah.
Not sure what to make of that, but it was not an accident that George.
It was not an accident.
George put that hole there for a reason. All right.
Stormy, I completely agree. I think this is the Stark gene. Yeah, is what. Yep, I agree.
A thing that the fandom doesn't think about enough is that, again, like Winterfell, in a lot of people, is the archetype of the North, the icy North. But Winterfell is fiery. The wolves are fiery. The wolf blood is fiery and red. Mm-hmm. They are the burning red heart in the cold North that everybody assumes like the Starks are kind of this cold aligned thing, and they're not. They're not icy in general. There's a lot of people that refer to Ned as being icy. Oh, you're no sense of humor, and they're going to thaw his icy demeanor and whatever. But the Starks are actually, their essential nature is very fiery.
Like an earth. Yeah, it's like with horoscopes. You're never just what horoscope is in right now? I don't know. Taurus, maybe?
Who has time for
Aries.
that?
No, I think it's Aries. Like you're never just an Aries. You're an Aries with the something rising, or you're an Aries with this moon. So yeah, you're never just one thing. You're one thing with the capability to go this way or that way. Actually, wait a minute. Hang on. It's still right here. This one.
Oh, jeez.
The magic.
Bingo.
You're never
That's the center square on your bingo card.
you're never just the one tree. You have two options. That's right.
All right, it's late and you went there. Okay. Hypothesis, opportunity to speculate. So, there must always be a Stark in Winterfell? Is that correspond to Royd turning the cameras off?
I think that's what happens when there isn't a Stark in Winterfell. That's when the dirty ice fire Ramsay gets in. I mean, I know it's initially
when because Ramsay gets in while Bran is still in Winterfell. Technically,
yeah, but he runs him out, and then hell breaks loose. Yeah, hell breaks loose. And Winterfell starts to like fall to pieces. Like the Nightflyer ship.
So crazy wacky tinfoil time here in the bonus round. I've had this idea for a long time. George is very explicit that Ned and Catelyn were not married in front of a weirwood. They were married in the Sept at River Run. Mm-hmm. So my point is that from the perspective of the weirwood, Ned's children are illegitimate. So plausibly, in that scene in Game of Thrones, when they leave and Ned goes south and Jon goes north, at that moment, there is no true Stark in Winterfell.
Actually, we're not sure. Is it explicitly mentioned that they went into a sept?
Yes. It is very... That's what caught my eye. Catelyn
I know they wed at the river run, but what...
They wedded in the sept. They did not get married in front of a tree.
Because there is a tree in a weirwood tree in the gardens of River Run.
Catelyn specifically remembers that it was a thing that caused friction for Ned. She was one of the things that she said she loved him for is that he was like she's from the south, she's not of the north, and that he bent over backwards to make her feel comfortable, and he didn't make her go through the traditional wedding thing. Right, and she said that he agreed to wed me in the steppe rather than in the northern way, so I would feel comfortable. And I don't know what that means, but I've always kind of wondered, does that mean that from the perspective of the weirwood or from someone, when, depending on how you theorize, you can say, well, there was no longer a Stark in Winterfell when Bran left, there was no longer a Stark in Winterfell when Ned left. There's a fun theory. I don't actually agree with it, but it's a fun theory, which is if Jon was hypothetically Brandon and Ashara's son, if you bought into that theory, it's hilarious because it inverts everything. Because that means Jon is the legitimate heir to Winterfell and Ned is the imposter. Because Ned is usurping his older brother's son. And it makes all of the stuff that Catelyn says about the competition between Robb and Jon hilarious because it's the opposite. That Jon would be the legitimate heir. Robb is the imposter. Robb is the bastard because Ned was never properly married. Robb isn't a Stark in the real sense of the words, but Jon would be if he was Brandon. The idea was that like Brandon and Ashara had a secret wedding in front of a tree somewhere, then that would make Jon the legitimate Stark heir from the perspective of the weirwood. I don't believe it, but it's a fun thing to say. But the question is if there always must be a Stark in Winterfell, what is the point in the story where there stopped being a Stark in Winterfell? When Bran left, that was the last plausible case. But it could be when Ned and Jon left. It could be But just one by one, Benjen leaves, then Ned and John leave, then Rickon leaves, and Bran leaves. And in theory, if there must be a Stark in Winterfell to be like the Watchman, the thing that we've talked about as a group before is that when at the same time as Bran's leaving is when the library tower finally burns and crumbles, and they get that vision that looks like a dragon from Summer's eyes. He sees the smoke and the flame coming up.
But that's kind of like, for me, the whole A Clash of King arc with Bran is about converting him and liberating him from all the other religions. Like, because...
breaking his chains.
Yeah, breaking his chains away, for one, from the Maester, from Maester Luwin. How sympathetic he is. He's a very sympathetic character, but he's
wrong.
But he's wrong.
Right.
And he tries to stop Bran from having dreams, and he shames Bran about stuff. About
tells him to lock away the wolves.
All right.
Yeah, Bran is described as being like imprisoned in his prince in a tower, an imprisoned prince in a tower. And it's Jojen who frees him, and then
Luwin has a very religious conversion in front below the tree.
Yeah,
where he's like, "Oh, I guess you were right.
Yeah,
go protect Bran. Go do. Bran's not my problem. I need you, wildly winged pagan woman, to take care of Bran for me, because clearly I don't know what I'm talking about."
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's also kind of Bran is he first he starts to believe Luwin at some point, like, okay, well, no, Jojen, what you're saying is, and don't talk to me about dreams. And he sends his wolf at him, etc. Right. So he's using his talents wrongly, just to kind of stay blind.
Right.
And then, but he converts, and then at the same around the time when Theon comes around, and he washes with his, like, it's poison. It's the sea is poison. It's the poisoned water. And Theon comes along, and he washes, like he starts to do the drowning, etc. But he kind of stops all the Citadel's influence and the Septon's influence. Right. He drowns Septon Chailey, poor young innocent guy, but yeah, he's a Septon. And then Ramsay comes along to wash away the poison water with fire. He burns that down, and he burns that, and that burning, it burns down the Sept. And when the Sept burn down and Bran leaves, that's when he sees the dragon go. And I think that means that the dragon's hold from the Targaryens, like the North was part of Westeros, of their kingdom. And I think it means they're split off. The dragon cannot hold. The fire dragon cannot keep Winterfell in line with them.
One thing I'll add. Yeah, one thing I'll add to that goes along with this particular topic is why they were married in a sept. Well, and then Eddard put a sept in Winterfell. Just thinking of Martinworld in general, because I agree with, the fire releases, it's all this fiery stuff from Winterfell. This putting a sept in Winterfell, putting a fiery sept, because the Faith of the Seven, their history and all of that association is with fire. So putting that in this green place, this northern icy green place that is Winterfell. Think back to George's story in 7 Times Never Kill Man. That's like putting one of the pyramids of worship in the jungles. That's installing a fire element in amongst the trees. and that's something that even in
That
that
happened in the Iron Islands too.
right,
That,
and
that there was a ruler that invited the Faith of the Seven to go out there, and it eventually provoked a rebellion, and the Ironborn burned all the septs and drove those people back to the mainland because of their fanaticism.
Yes, and the Ironborn are just an offshoot of First Men, to whichever wave they came through on. But
and that was in the World Book. It doesn't have a plot point. Most of the stuff in the World Book is him just shadow puppeting, like, oh, here's what really happened, figure it out, and he's making that analogy.
And and we think back to "In Seven Times Never Kill Man," it's like what happens to these pyramids every so often is they get broken, and shattered, and because there's something wrong with the pyramids when you get close to them, your eyes turn colors, they turn gold, and you have to start worshiping them. You even sacrifice your children to them. You burn all of your winter stores for them. It's essentially it's a slow genocide.
Right. So let me before we break, I'll read you the quotes. This is mentioned like Game of Thrones Catelyn 1 and in Catelyn 2. So it's obviously one of my hypotheses is if it's in book 1, it's important because George was really packed in and dense during that time period.
Right.
One day 15 years ago, this second father had become a brother as well, as he and Ned stood together in the sept at River Run to wed 2 sisters, the daughters of Lord Hoster Tully. Then Catelyn 2, he looked somehow smaller and more vulnerable, like the youth she had wed in the sept at River Run 15 years gone. Her loins still ached from the urgency of his lovemaking. It's like, okay, I see what you did there, George. Like, okay, there's twice. If I look, there's probably another thing somewhere. He very specific. He's not just filling out, like rolling the dice. Okay, where did they get married? Okay, it was here. He's moving chess pieces on his board, and they were married in the sept. And there's a reason for that. Now, it may be political. It doesn't have to be magical. But me being the person I am, I immediately thought, well, is she really a Stark if they're not really married? Because I know people again, George is Catholic essentially in his heart. Once you ever grew up in a Catholic family, you can't not be Catholic. And I know people that believe, well, she married a Protestant, so she's not really married. Like, I know people that feel that way, that it just, if you're not married by a priest, you're not really married.
Right.
I'm still waiting for evidence of that.
I think actually that the fate would be more like, oh, you wed before a tree, that's not a real marriage, than the other way around. So I don't think that really counts. But I do think that Ned, he was too lenient for the fate, and it's the first time since thousands and thousands of years that there's a sept at Winterfell, and that's near.
He's not keeping the old way.
Next generation, if he hadn't been lured south and Caitlyn hadn't been lured south, because what I think is fundamental is not so Ned is lured south, but that Caitlyn gets south and she never returns to Winterfell after that. She always gets astray, and it's like her influence. Her fate influence on Winterfell is gone. And the moment that she's gone and leaves, that's when Bran wakes up.
Right.
Because he sees her in the dream where he wakes up. That's when she leaves the bite.
Well, she's praying over his body and refusing to let his wolf return to him.
And it's only when the wolf returns to him that that's the first sign that he's starting to get a little better. And you think of Robb is even like where Catelyn's like, close the shutters, I don't want to hear those wolves, and Robb is like, no, open them, he needs to hear them singing.
Well, like literally the library tower is on fire. So you have a burning library, there's a blood sacrifice, and the wolf touches Bran and he wakes up.
So we've gone on really long. I can't believe this.
I'm sure you can. Don't be modest. We could do this for.
I know. But I want
That's a summary.
Yes. So Nightflyers, what is it all about? It is a horror set in space. George is very specifically clear about that. It's a horror set in space. This is a story that is absolutely loaded with carryover information to Ice and Fire, and not just that. It's these are themes and archetypes that are repeating not just from one story into Ice and Fire, but throughout Martinworld's writing, like over and over and over again. He does this with this with this. This is sort of a progression that he follows. Certain things have to burn. Certain things have to break. George says he doesn't really believe in the hero's journey as we know it, as any literary student has been taught. But you can't have a successful story without that skim of that glue. So yeah, it's just how he has reinvented his hero story. So the point of all of this is to encourage you guys to read more Martinworld stories. I mean, it's what we do as we patiently wait for the Winds of Winter. Is we catch up on old Martin stories and
Squint.
and squint and stand on our heads. No.
Can I ask two questions still?
Okay.
It's about Nightflyers itself.
Okay.
So we know the ship is called Nightflyer.
Right.
But the title of the story is Nightflyers.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And who do you think are the Nightflyers?
Well,
John and Val.
I think for this story in particular, the Nightflyers is the prologue. The prologue, which might come after the very last chapter. I think it's possible. That's a question that I ask on my blog and I think we touched on this before in a previous discussion. One of our warm-up discussions is who wrote essentially what is the prologue. I'm mostly convinced that it's Melantha. It could be the mom. I'm not as convinced that it's that it's Royd. So I think the Nightflyers is the three of them together after the final Section 39 chapter, as they're just coasting out in space.
The dragon needs 3 heads.
Right.
The audiobook, the audiobook reads that prologue in Melantha's voice, which taints that in my head.
Right.
Because I know they didn't call George and say, "Oh, what should we do?"
The audiobook is read by a voice actress. She does some other acting and as well, but her name is Adenrele Ojo, and she has the best narrating voice for this. Some of the voices are a little bit wonky, but when she is in a true narrator voice and she's not doing a side character, it's beautiful. So when I just read the opening prologue, I'm always reading it in her voice because she does it so well.
Right.
Second
question.
I think the prologue it keeps the debate. At the one hand, you have the epilogue is Melantha, and it would fit in the timeline with the prologue. And it could be, but would she say in the epilogue? She doesn't say my Nightflyer. She doesn't regard the ship as hers. So it must be either the mother or it's Royd. And Melantha isn't also so interested in the Vulcan as Royd is. So I'm leaning towards Royd as being
okay.
We'll never know. So
We'll never know.
That's what, so the first mystery you're introduced is never answered. It's left up to us what we believe.
It's just like George's story with Morning Comes Mistfall. We are never, he's purposely not going to tell us key details to lots of parts of his story. So we need to get used to that.
He gives us a lot of answers in the story about Royd's background, about the mother being in the ghost in the ship, and about enough about the Volcrin. Not everything, but enough. Like, okay, we know it's an animal or something like that. But well, the question raised by the prologue is not really answered.
Oh, well, he gets to have his cake and eat it too, because it's as if it was all three of those things, depending on how you read it. Again, he loves this multiple perspective thing. Yeah. So it's whoever you want it to be, whichever one makes it the best for you. So you're doing half of his job for him. You're picking the best ending based on which one is most satisfying to you.
Speaking of satisfying endings, woo, we made it. Thank you, everybody, for
exactly, Stormy. That's the point.
Turn in your bingo cards.
There you go. Exactly. I totally agree, Stormy. So thank you guys for being here. If you want to continue to ask questions or talk about this story, you can either do so on my blog or follow any one of us on
the Twit hole.
The Twit hole. Bingo card. Follow any one of us on the Twit hole and feel free to ask. I think I have this story pinned on my profile right now, so it's easy to find it and follow there, and we can all just join in discussion. So
we'll be referring to the story again,
right? So in addition to like encouraging you to read Martinworld, it's like we're rebuilding this world to show how interconnected it is. So more and more stories are going to be referenced over and over and over again the further along. We have 80 stories to go through, and I think we've gone through like 2 and a prologue. 2 and a prologue. So we still have plenty of time. Plenty of stuff to talk about. So okay,
we get to start this all over when Winds of Winter comes out, because it'll be like, oh, that was in Nightflyers.
Remember? I know. See, this is all Winds of Winter and a Dream of Spring primer. So when you get those books and you read those books, you're gonna be like, yeah, I know what's going on. Going on.
For like 6 weeks, all you're gonna get from me is just, I told you so. I told you so part 3. I told you so part 6.
We're going to have to get you an I told you so bingo card. All right. That is it for me for tonight. And until the next story, which I think I'm going to continue with the proper corpse handling stories. We did Sand Kings and we did Nightflyers, which are unofficial corpse handling. I think I might start to get into like probably Nobody Leaves New Pittsburgh. That one, and then Override, which I've been dying to do for probably 5 years. And then
they're gonna hate it.
Yeah. Then Meat House Man. That's my story. That's my jam. You are so welcome. Thank you, Stormy. Thank you, everybody, for hanging on this long. I appreciate the heck out of it. I can't even express how much. You guys are crazy. All right. I love you. Good night. Woo!
Woo!